Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 1581, Louis XII returns to his country. It's incredible. It's incredible. Not to mention the other Spanish soldiers, even Gonzalo de Córdoba, who personally led all this, was shocked. In this ambush, the more than 10,000 Spanish troops under his command, mainly recruits, relied on the terrain advantage to beat the fierce Moroccan cavalry without any ability to fight back. In the end, only 17 Spanish soldiers were killed and more than 70 were injured. Among these casualties, except for 12 who were killed by Moroccan masters who broke through into the alley and forcibly killed, the rest of the casualties were basically killed and injured by Moroccan soldiers who picked up bricks and stones on the street to fight back, which was purely bad luck. However, the results they achieved were, captured 6,850 enemy cavalry, killed 3,800 enemies, and injured 4,350 enemies. Such a high loss ratio made Gonzalo de Córdoba, a famous general of his generation, open his mouth in surprise. No wonder Archduke Marin has always been keen on using conspiracies and tricks. It turns out that the effect is so powerful, and it feels so good. A devil's seed sprouted in the heart of the gentleman Gonzalo de Córdoba. Gonzalo de Córdoba knew very well that as the king of a country, Marin often engaged in conspiracies and tricks, which might ruin his reputation. But he was different. He was just a Spanish minister and did not need a perfect reputation. His greatest contribution to the Kingdom of Spain was to win the battle, not to strive for a good reputation as a gentleman. For the general, victory is everything, and nothing else matters. After thinking it through, Gonzalo de Córdoba seemed to have some imprisonment in his heart opened, and a little devil ran out by himself. Well, the French are powerful now. It seems that I have to use some unconventional means. Gonzalo de Córdoba thought when he boarded the ship to Sicily. Just as Gonzalo de Córdoba boarded the ship to Sicily, Louis XII was drinking farewell wine with his men in Naples. Louis XII must have understood that the Spaniards would not give up. The proposal of the representative sent to Spain to buy the Kingdom of Naples with money was rejected by the other side, no matter how much money was offered. So, there will be more wars in the future. However, he has to leave. He is the king of a country and has stayed in Italy for too long. Now, there are signs of instability in the Kingdom of France. Without him to go back and take charge, Queen Anne can't suppress those monkeys. In addition, John Lafitte reminded him 2 days ago that the deadline for marriage given by King Edward of England in 1515 is not far away. There is still more than a year left. If France has not given birth to a prince, the marriage with the British Princess Margaret will be abolished. After all, what Edward said makes sense. His daughter cannot wait indefinitely for France to give birth to a new prince. A woman's time is limited, and she can't wait for her young husband to grow up slowly. In particular, this era is not the generation after the development of medicine. In this era, it is very dangerous for women to give birth after the age of 30, and giving birth after the age of 40 is equivalent to suicide. Therefore, women cannot marry men who are much younger than themselves. Otherwise, they will miss the best childbearing age. Therefore, Louis XII must go back. It is not only to stabilize the domestic situation, but also to be able to toss out a prince. The word toss is really not wrong. After all, Louis XII is 52 years old. At this age, among the European nobles of this era, it is not considered short-lived. Maybe she will die one day. As for Queen Anne, although she is much younger, she is also 37 years old. Men may not have much at this age, but women at this age will definitely have a life-threatening experience when they give birth to children. But Louis XII can't care so much. Anyway, he doesn't have any deep feelings for Queen Anne. At the beginning, the reason why he abandoned his fiancée Jean of France and married Anne of Brittany instead was not for any bullshit love, but to ensure that the Duchy of Brittany would not be split from France. After all, if Anne remarried, the Duchy of Brittany would be separated from France. If it fell into the hands of Maximilian I, it would be even more fatal. Therefore, the marriage between Louis XII and Queen Anne was originally a marriage of political interests, without any emotion. As for whether Queen Anne was dangerous to be pregnant at the age of 37, Louis XII didn't care, he just wanted a male heir. Even if Queen Anne died in danger, maybe he would be happy. Originally in history, after Queen Anne of Brittany died, Louis XII turned around and married Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry VII, and died shamefully on Mary Tudor's belly. Of course, this does not mean that Louis XII is an old pervert, but because, for the European monarchs of this era, a male heir is too important. Similar to Louis XII is King Ferdinand II of Aragon. Ferdinand II could cry bitterly while holding the corpse of Prince Juan, who might have contracted tuberculosis, or he could imprison his poor crazy daughter, Mad Juana, just to obtain the regency of Castile. In short, the change of dynasties in the European royal family can also be said to be a history of extinction. If a king did not give birth to a son, the dynasty might have to change. The eastern countries of the same era did not have this worry, because Europe could only have monogamy, while the emperors of the East could have one wife and multiple concubines. This does not mean that the Eastern emperors were more licentious and immoral, but that the Eastern countries attached more importance to their offspring. There is an interesting fact: the higher the status of women in a region, the lower the fertility rate. In later generations, in regions like the Middle East and Africa where women had no status, children were born without money. While Europe and the United States have deteriorated, in China in the 21st century, the status of women has increased, but the fertility rate has greatly decreased. In the 20th century, when feudal ideas were seriously remnant, China's fertility rate was still very high. In ancient Europe, the status of women was much higher than that of the East and the Middle East. But it also caused a bad consequence: European monarchs who only married one wife and did not allow divorce often died out. In the Ming dynasty of the same period, only Emperor Hongzhi Zhu Yutang, who only married one wife, gave birth to his son Zhengde, and finally died out. Of course, there was also a carpenter Emperor Tianqi Zhu Yushao who died young. Because he died early and the fierce struggle in the palace, he did not leave any offspring. At this time, Louis XII was actually close to madness. He had temporarily forgotten about this during the war. After John Lafitte reminded him, he immediately remembered that he didn't have a son yet. So, after he arranged the defense of the Kingdom of Naples, he decided to return home. He must sort out the problem of not having a son with the Queen. And the reason why John Lafitte made this suggestion was also requested by Marin: if Louis XII was not allowed to go back and work hard, how could he die in a woman's belly as in the original history? Louis XII was still quite shrewd and not easy to deal with. Therefore, Marin hoped that he would die sooner, just like the original history. As for his successor, Francis I, although he was well regarded in history, Marin, who had read history, knew that he was very reckless and impulsive when he was young. Otherwise, he would not have been captured by Charles V. Moreover, a new king who has no foundation needs several years to establish his prestige. And Marin needs those few years to complete the annexation of England. Therefore, Marin hopes that Louis XII will die soon, preferably in a woman's belly as in the original history. In this way, with a few years, he will have time to plan England. If this old man does not die, when he is annexing England, this old man may send troops to the North Sea Kingdom to make trouble and interfere with his annexation of England. Therefore, Marin secretly instructed John Lafitte to remind Louis XII that he should go back and make a concubine with the Queen. Only by going back to make a concubine can he die in a woman's belly. Chapter 1582. Edward also withdrew. After drinking the farewell wine, Louis XII returned home with 15,000 French knights, leaving only 5,000 French knights and 30,000 infantrymen to stay in the local area. Before leaving, Louis XII also dealt with 16,000 captured German mercenaries, which were the remnants of the 20,000 German mercenaries originally hired by Spain. In that night attack, it was mainly the Spanish troops who ran away, and only a small number of the 20,000 German mercenaries ran away. Most of the rest were blocked in the city by the French army. In desperation, the desperate German mercenaries had to surrender. However, when Louis XII proposed to hire this group of people to guard against the counterattack of the Spanish army, these German mercenaries refused. They did not betray their original employers without any scruples like the Italian mercenaries, but refused to fight Spain. The leader of the German mercenaries, Ludendorff, believed that they were ashamed of not being able to complete the Spanish commission. Now, it is extremely dishonorable to accept the employment of the original enemy and turn the guns against the Spanish employers. They would rather die than turn around and fight their original employers after being defeated. Even if they accept the French employment, the opponent cannot be the original employer, the Spaniards. Unexpectedly, the stubbornness of the Germans was highly praised by Louis XII. Louis XII believed that if these German mercenaries accepted the employment very happily, he would not be at ease. Because it is possible that they will join forces with the original employer, the Spaniards, to assassinate the French. After all, a mercenary without moral integrity is not trustworthy. This era is not the era when mercenaries completely lost their moral integrity in the mid to late 16th century. At present, except for the Italian mercenaries with a lower moral integrity, mercenaries from other countries still attach great importance to honor. Of course, Louis XII did not waste the value of these 16,000 German mercenaries. In the end, Louis XII decided to take them north to reoccupy the Duchy of Milan. Then, let them garrison the Duchy of Milan. In any case, the Duchy of Milan is the most important agricultural area in Italy. At the same time, the city of Milan is also the largest city in the Holy Roman Empire. Louis XII was not satisfied with just annexing the Kingdom of Naples. It would be great if he could annex Milan as well. Then, these 16,000 German mercenaries accepted the employment and followed Louis XII's 15,000 French knights northward. They had to accept it. They had become prisoners of war of the French. They had to redeem themselves at a high price or be killed as useless prisoners of war. They didn't want to die, and as mercenaries who couldn't save money, they had no money to redeem themselves. In exchange for freedom, they could only accept the employment of the French and fight against opponents other than their original employers, the Spaniards. As for John Lafitte, he also followed Louis XII's army northward. Originally, Louis XII hoped that he could stay and assist Charles III, Duke of Bourbon, the highest commander of the remaining troops, to deal with the Spaniards. After all, John Lafitte's resourcefulness had left a deep impression on Louis XII. But how could John Lafitte stay? He still had an important mission. His mission was to return to Paris, find out the whereabouts of Margaret of the Tudor family, and then send someone to kill her to eliminate future troubles. Therefore, John Lafitte finally found a way to turn down the arrangement to stay in Naples and return to his country with Louis XII. Of course, before going back, he recommended the truly capable former Duke of Gages, now Count of Nantes, Charles, to stay and assist the Duke of Bourbon, Charles III, to guard the local area. John Lafitte was self-aware. He knew that all his strategies were secretly taught to him by Marin, not his ability. And Count of Nantes, Charles, was the one who was really capable. He was also worried that Count Charles would become an obstacle to him after returning to Paris, so he simply suggested that Louis XII keep him to assist the Duke of Bourbon, Charles III. And Louis XII also felt that he needed to keep a capable person to help the Duke of Bourbon, Charles III, who lacked wisdom, so he agreed. When the army left, Count Charles was 100 times unhappy. As a great noble, he knew very well that whether the great nobles of France were doing well depended on whether the king valued them. Only if you hang around the King of France all day long will you be reused. Now that he is left in Naples, he obviously lost the opportunity to accompany the king, and it will be difficult for him to be favored in the future. So, he wanted to tear off John Lafitte's mouth, who asked him to make random suggestions. But he had no choice in the end, because John Lafitte was the most outstanding in this war. At present, because of his great merits, John Lafitte's favor in Louis XII is much greater than that of Count Charles. Similar to the last time, seeing the French army of more than 30,000 men coming aggressively, the Duke of Milan Ludovico Sforza was frightened and took his family and thousands of men, and rolled up the gold and silver treasures in the treasury to retreat to the Mustere Valley again. The French army once again took Milan without any effort. Although they still did not get much treasure this time, the food in the warehouse of Milan was cheap for the French. In any case, the plain of the Duchy of Milan is also the largest plain in Italy and the most important granary in Italy. Although the volcanic ash in Naples is very fertile, there are few plains in Naples, and only a small number of river valleys can be used for farming. Unlike the Po River Plain in Milan, which covers an area of 46,000 square kilometers and is the most important granary in Italy. Moreover, the Sforza family has paid great attention to the construction of water conservancy in the local area for many years and dug many irrigation rivers. This time, it is completely cheap for the French. Most of the grain harvested last year was looted by the French army. Then, Louis XII continued to return home with 15,000 French knights. The 16,000 German mercenaries were left by Louis XII to guard the Duchy of Milan. After all, the Duchy of Milan is the first granary in Italy. If France increases its troops in the future, it will definitely need a lot of food. As the first granary in Italy, the Duchy of Milan can obviously provide a lot of food. Therefore, Louis XII simply left Ludendorff's 16,000 German mercenaries to guard the entire Duchy of Milan. They were unwilling to fight the Spaniards, but they had no problem fighting Ludovico Sforza of the Duchy of Milan. After all, Ludovico Sforza is not Spanish. And on the way back to Louis XII, Marin, who had long known that Louis XII had returned to his country, after all, John Lafitte was the insider, also sent a pigeon to Dublin and sent someone to urgently notify King Edward of England, who was leading his army to encircle and suppress the remnants of the O'Brien family, the last native family on the island of Ireland. At this time, Edward's army had already conquered Ennis, the capital of the O'Brien family's territory, Clare County in later generations, and was now looking for the remnants of the O'Brien family who were fighting guerrilla warfare. The main force of the British army had already reached the Shannon River, and they were just short of encircling and annihilating the more than 2,000 guerrillas of the O'Brien family. But Marin's letter still scared Edward. After knowing the news that Louis XII had returned to Paris, Edward could not sit still. Because Edward knew that if Louis XII returned to Paris and learned that Edward was leading troops in Ireland, he would definitely not miss this opportunity. He would definitely make trouble, and even arrange for the remnants of the Tudor dynasty to take the opportunity to return to England to launch a rebellion. Without the support of the past at home, this kind of rebellion could easily become a big one. After thinking it over again and again, Edward had to temporarily give up the plan to wipe out the remaining resistance of the O'Brien family before returning home. Moreover, Edward had even planned to take the opportunity to destroy the earldoms of Ormond and Desmond, which were no longer obedient. These descendants of Norman nobles have been local emperors in Ireland for too long and no longer listen to the English royal family. At this time, Edward happened to lead a large army here, which was a good opportunity to get rid of them. However, in comparison, the security of the homeland is more important. In desperation, Edward had to announce to the outside world that England had completed the unification of the island of Ireland and was now officially triumphant. Of course, Edward was not stupid enough to withdraw all the troops. Anyway, the resistance of the O'Brien family was only more than 2,000 people. Therefore, Edward simply left Adler's more than 1,000 troops from the Wicklow territory, as well as the 5,000 soldiers of the 4th Legion, and the 1,500 Cossack cavalry supported by Marin later. In this way, it is enough to deal with the more than 2,000 remaining resistance troops. Moreover, it can also allow the ally Marin's brother Adler to gain some experience. And Edward himself, naturally, returned to the country with England's most important Royal Guard Corps, so as not to be stabbed in the back by the French. Of course, when publicizing to the outside world, he would not tell the truth, but would say that the wise and mighty His Majesty Edward had eliminated all the resistance forces of the Irish barbarians, and now he has led the army back to the country in triumph. Chapter 1583 Offering Medicine. Edward returned to England in fear, and after a fake, triumphal ceremony, he was nervously guarding against possible sabotage by the French. After all, the French had planned an uprising of the remnants of the Tudor dynasty before. If it weren't for coincidence, Wales might still be in turmoil now. But he didn't know that Louis XII, who also held a triumphal ceremony after returning to Paris, didn't care about England. At this moment, he and Queen Anne were busy making a villain. As the saying goes, a kiss between middle-aged couples can cause nightmares for several nights. Louis XII himself is an old man, and Queen Anne is also a 37-year-old middle-aged woman. There is no hyaluronic acid these days. Queen Anne has a lot of wrinkles on her face and has gained weight. Therefore, Louis XII completely suppressed his disgust and made a villain with Queen Anne. Similarly, Queen Anne was not interested in Louis XII, a weak old man. 37 years old is a tiger and wolf age, but her husband is a 52-year-old weak-footed old man. Therefore, both sides endured the disgust and tried their best to make a villain. After several times, Louis XII said helplessly in private when he was drinking with Count Duarte and John Lafitte, "The Queen's appeal is getting worse and worse. I can't get excited when I see the Queen now. It's difficult to complete the process of making a baby. My dear ministers, is there any way to solve it? I am not a monarch who is absurd and unjust. But France really needs a male heir." Several confident ministers immediately understood that Louis XII's subtext was, "You guys, find me some drugs to help me." So they acted separately to find alchemists who are good at preparing such drugs. John Lafitte was very straightforward. He secretly sent a message to Marin for help. Marin was also straightforward. He directly found Luan, the imperial physician brought back from the Ming dynasty, and asked him to help find a solution. As the imperial physician of the Ming dynasty, Luan also dabbled in this. After all, the emperor of China has so many concubines. If the emperor is old, it is normal to use some drugs to enhance his sexual pleasure. These imperial doctors all have a few secret recipes of this kind to win recognition. After listening to Ma Lin's intention, Luan thought about it and said, "I can make these medicines, and there is more than one. After all, you have brought back enough medicinal materials from the Ming dynasty. But, sir, you are only in your 30s, and you often practice martial arts, so you shouldn't need them." After saying that, Luan looked at Ma Lin with a strange look. That look seemed to say, "This guy looks strong, but it turns out to be useless." Ma Lin blushed immediately, knowing that Luan had misunderstood him. So, he explained, "This is not what I want, it's what the female branch in Las Vegas needs. Many customers in their 50s and 60s are no longer able to get an erection. So, we need some erection-enhancing drugs to make the guests enjoy themselves." Marin didn't dare to say that it was prepared for Louis XII. If the news leaked out, it would be fatal. Therefore, he had an idea and changed the target to the female prostitutes in Las Vegas. 50 or 60 years old. Lu En stroked his goatee and frowned. Grand Duke, at such an old age, you still use those tiger and wolf drugs, it's easy to have an impotence. I want an impotence. Marin's eyes lit up. But thinking of Louis XII's special status, he couldn't just take it once and that was it. So, he changed his tone and said, it can't be too obvious. It's best to eat it for a while before you get an immediate wind. Before that, it's best to have an obvious aphrodisiac effect. Lu En was a little surprised and doubtful, and Marin saw it, so he explained casually, I defeated the princes of 8 countries last year and captured a large number of enemy nobles, some of whom are now very dishonest. However, I can't execute them publicly. You know, European rules don't allow the killing of nobles, so. Lu En immediately understood and said, I understand, Grand Duke. I will prescribe a suitable medicine for you. This medicine is called Fang Shi Long, which was used exclusively by Wei Yangsheng, the little overlord of Qinglu, in the capital. However, this medicine is too strong and overbearing. Later, Wei Yangsheng died of a stroke at a young age. When I was young, I was curious and had the honor to participate in this matter and got this formula. This formula has a strong effect and immediate results. It can be said that it can make anything go away. Moreover, there was no harm to the body at that time, and it can even make people energetic. However, if you insist on using it for a few months, your body will be hollowed out unknowingly. When Marin heard it, he felt something was wrong. How could this be a combination of Viagra and caffeine? But who cares, he just wants the effect. So, he made a direct decision, okay, this is it, we want this Fang Shi Long. Its main ingredients are Herba epimedii and deer antler. Lu En began to introduce. Marin interrupted impatiently, needless to say, I'm not going to use it, I just want the effect. But try to add more licorice. This way, the taste will be better. Yes, sir. After the medicine was prepared, Marin secretly sent spies to send it to Paris. After all, this medicine is not a letter, it cannot be transported by pigeons, it can only be sent by people. When John Lafitte entered the palace with a few flavors of Fangshilong, Count Duarte and other close ministers of the King of France had already presented various aphrodisiacs found from alchemists to Louis XII. Even Duarte's medicine was used by Louis XII yesterday. However, Louis XII sat on the throne with a bitter face, rubbing his waist, and said, Sir Det, I tried your medicine last night. The effect was good at that time, but afterwards I had backache and was listless. Det immediately bent down and said, I am damned, please take care of yourself, your majesty. Seeing that the medicine offered by Count Det did not seem to be very effective, the other favorites saw the opportunity and came forward to let Louis XII use the medicine they found. Your majesty, your majesty. Please use my medicine, which comes from the alchemist Norton. Your majesty, please use my medicine. It is said that my medicine was prepared by Master Pushit with Spanish fly as the main medicine. John Lafitte held the medicine and stood at the back, and did not compete with others. Because the few people present were basically earls, and there was also a duke. As a viscount, he could not be presumptuous in front of several dukes and earls. It was not until a few days later, when Louis XII was tortured by the medicines of several other people, that he happily took out the medicine and presented it to Louis XII. Your Majesty, you should try my medicine. My medicine was prepared by a hermit master and is said to be non-toxic. After the treatment, you will feel refreshed. I have tried it these days and the effect is very good. Then, in front of Louis XII, he used the honeycomb coal stove promoted by the North Sea Kingdom and put a casserole on it to cook the medicine. After the medicine was cooked, in order to reassure Louis XII, he drank a large bowl of it himself. Not long after, John Lafitte blushed and said to Louis XII, Your Majesty, I can't hold it anymore, please give me a maid. Then, under the strange gaze of Louis XII and a group of favorites, John Lafitte took a strong maid given by Louis XII and entered a lounge. Half an hour later, John Lafitte came out looking refreshed, but the strong maid was still not out. Is the effect so good? John Lafitte nodded, yes. Anyone who uses it will know. Chapter 1584 Suppression. Edward returned to England trembling with fear, and after holding a triumphal ceremony, in a fake manner, he was nervously guarding against possible sabotage by the French. After all, the French had planned an uprising of the remnants of the Tudor dynasty before. If it weren't for coincidence, maybe Wales is still making trouble now. But he didn't know that Louis XII, who also held a triumphal ceremony after returning to Paris, didn't pay attention to England. At this moment, he and Queen Anne were busy making villains. As the saying goes, a kiss between middle-aged couples can cause nightmares for several nights. Louis XII himself is an old man, and Queen Anne is also a 37-year-old middle-aged woman. There is no hyaluronic acid these days. Queen Anne has a lot of wrinkles on her face and has gained weight. Therefore, Louis XII completely suppressed his disgust and made a little man with Queen Anne. Similarly, Queen Anne was not interested in Louis XII, a weak old man. 37 years old is a tiger and wolf age, but her husband is a 52-year-old weak old man. Therefore, both sides suppressed their disgust and tried their best to make a little man. After several times, Louis XII was drinking with Count Duarte and John Lafitte, and said helplessly in private, "The Queen's attractiveness is getting worse and worse. I can't get excited when I see the Queen now. It's difficult to complete the process of making a man. My dear ministers, is there any way to solve it? I am not a wild and lawless monarch. But France really needs a male heir." Several confidants immediately understood that Louis XII's subtext was, "You guys, hurry up and find some drugs to help me." So they split up and went to find those alchemists who are good at preparing such drugs. John Lafitte was very straightforward. He secretly sent a message to Marin for help. Marin was also straightforward. He directly found Luan, the imperial physician brought back from the Ming dynasty, and asked him to help find a solution. As the imperial physician of the Ming dynasty, Luan also had some experience in this. After all, the emperor of China had so many concubines. If the emperor was old, it was normal to use some drugs to help him. These imperial physicians all had a few secret recipes of this kind to win appreciation. After listening to Marin's intention, Luan thought about it and said, "These medicines can be prepared by me, and there is more than one." After all, the adults brought back enough medicinal materials from the Ming dynasty. "But, my lord, you are only in your 30s, and you often practice martial arts, so you shouldn't need them." After speaking, Luan looked at Marin with a weird look. That look seemed to say, "This guy looks strong, but it turns out to be useless." Marin blushed immediately, knowing that Luan had misunderstood him. So, he explained, "This is not what I want, it's what the female branch in Las Vegas needs. Many customers in their 50s and 60s are no longer able to get an erection. So, we need some erection-enhancing drugs to make the guests enjoy themselves." Marin didn't dare to say that it was prepared for Louis XII. If the news leaked out, it would be fatal. Therefore, he had an idea and changed the target to the female prostitutes in Las Vegas. 50 or 60 years old. Luan stroked his goatee and frowned, "Grand Duke, at such an old age, you still use those tiger and wolf drugs, it's easy to have an impotence." "I want an impotence." Marin's eyes lit up. But thinking of Louis XII's special status, he couldn't just take it once and that was it. So, he changed his tone and said, "It can't be too obvious. It's best to eat it for a while before you get an immediate wind. Before that, it's best to have an obvious aphrodisiac effect." Luan was a little surprised and doubtful, and Marin saw it, so he explained casually, "I defeated the princes of 8 countries last year and captured a large number of enemy nobles, some of whom are now very dishonest. However, I can't execute them publicly. You know, European rules don't allow the killing of nobles, so." Luan immediately understood and said, "I understand, Grand Duke. I will prescribe a suitable medicine for you. This medicine is called Fang Shi Long, which was used exclusively by Wei Yangsheng, the little overlord of Qinglu, in the capital. However, this medicine is too strong and overbearing. Later, Wei Yangsheng died of a stroke at a young age. When I was young, I was curious and had the honor to participate in this matter and got this formula. This formula has a strong effect and immediate results. It can be said that it can make anything go away. Moreover, there was no harm to the body at that time, and it can even make people energetic. However, if you insist on using it for a few months, your body will be hollowed out unknowingly." When Marin heard it, he felt something was wrong. How could this be a combination of Viagra and caffeine? But who cares, he just wants the effect. So, he made a direct decision, "Okay, this is it, we want this Fang Shi Long. Its main ingredients are Herba epimedii and deer antler." Luan began to introduce. Marin interrupted impatiently, "Needless to say, I'm not going to use it, I just want the effect. But try to add more licorice. This way, the taste will be better." "Yes, sir." After the medicine was prepared, Marin secretly sent spies to send it to Paris. After all, this medicine is not a letter, it cannot be transported by pigeons, it can only be sent by people. When John Lafitte entered the palace with a few flavors of Fangshilong, Count Duarte and other close ministers of the King of France had already presented various aphrodisiacs found from alchemists to Louis XII. Even Duarte's medicine was used by Louis XII yesterday. However, Louis XII sat on the throne with a bitter face, rubbing his waist, and said, "Sir Det, I tried your medicine last night. The effect was good at that time, but afterwards I had backache and was listless." Det immediately bent down and said, "I am damned, please take care of yourself, your majesty." Seeing that the medicine offered by Count Det did not seem to be very effective, the other favorites saw the opportunity and came forward to let Louis XII use the medicine they found. Your majesty, please use my medicine, which comes from the alchemist Norton. Your majesty, please use my medicine. It is said that my medicine was prepared by Master Pushet with Spanish fly as the main medicine. John Lafitte held the medicine and stood at the back, and did not compete with others. Because the few people present were basically earls, and there was also a duke. As a viscount, he could not be presumptuous in front of several dukes and earls. It was not until a few days later, when Louis XII was tortured to death by the medicines of several other people, that he happily took out the medicine and presented it to Louis XII. Your majesty, you should try my medicine. My medicine was prepared by a hermit master and is said to be non-toxic. After taking it, you will feel refreshed. I have tried it these few days and the effect is very good. Then, in front of Louis XII, he used the honeycomb coal stove promoted by the North Sea Kingdom, set up a casserole, and boiled the medicine. After the medicine was boiled, in order to reassure Louis XII, he drank a large bowl of it himself. Soon, John Lafitte's face turned red, and he said to Louis XII, "Your Majesty, I can't hold it anymore, please give me a maid." Then, under the strange gaze of Louis XII and a group of favorites, John Lafitte took a strong maid given by Louis XII and entered a lounge. Half an hour later, John Lafitte came out with a refreshed face, while the strong maid was still late. Is the effect so good? John Lafitte nodded, yes. Anyone who uses it will know. Chapter 1585, Victory and Suggestions. Everything happened so suddenly that even Duke Ulrich and Wolf, who was preparing to be the insider, had no time to react. Seeing that the opportunity was rare, the knights under Duke Ulrich took advantage of the opportunity before the enemy turned around and directly launched a charge. Duke Ulrich had to shout anxiously, "Catch them alive, I want to catch them alive. I won't give you a commission if too many people die." Perhaps because he disliked his low voice, Duke Ulrich of Württemberg simply asked several of his men with loud voices to shout together, "Catch them alive, I want to catch them alive. I won't give you a commission if too many people die. Catch them alive, I want to catch them alive. I won't give you a commission if too many people die." This was definitely a stupid move, because after Duke Ulrich's men shouted, the knights who had already launched the charge hesitated. But fortunately, their enemies were two scumbags. Because they were unprepared, and the European army of this era was used to putting the weakest at the back. Therefore, with just one charge, the troops behind the more than 30,000 peasant army were directly overwhelmed. Fortunately, the words that Duke Ulrich had his men shout worked. The plate-armored knights who had completed a charge shouted, "Put down your weapons. Hold your head and squat. Hold your head and squat. Surrender and you will not be killed." Then, a large number of peasant soldiers were frightened by the aggressive knights, and they put down their weapons and squatted with their heads in their hands. At this time, the core forces of the peasant uprising army in front finally reacted. "No, the enemy has cut off our retreat." The leader of the uprising army, Caspar, panicked. But after being persuaded by several diehards, he finally calmed down and commanded the elite troops to prepare for battle with the Württemberg army. Although the old and weak behind the peasant army were easily defeated by the Württemberg army, after they squatted with their heads in their hands, they also blocked the way forward for the Württemberg army. In this way, this gave Caspar the opportunity to calmly organize his army to counterattack. When the Württemberg army took away the thousands of old and weak peasant soldiers who had surrendered in the back row, Caspar had organized the most elite troops of more than 10,000 people and set up a battle formation, intending to fight a big battle with the Württemberg army. Because the Württemberg army was restrained by Duke Ulrich, they were required to try to capture them alive. As a result, although the Württemberg army was more powerful, they fought back and forth with the elite peasant army. Of course, the Württemberg army did not suffer any loss because of its good equipment. At this time, Duke Ulrich became impatient. He rode forward and shouted, "What are you waiting for? Kill Caspar." But soon, he realized didn't this leak the news that he had sent someone undercover before? If people knew that he deliberately sent someone to lure Caspar and his group to kill the nobles, he would be finished. So he immediately changed his words, "Whoever kills Caspar, I will make him a fief knight." Wolf and the other 5 understood that Duke Ulrich was sending a signal to them. Taking advantage of the chaos on the battlefield, Wolf took off the cloak that symbolized an officer on his plate armor, plucked out the mustache on his hat, grabbed a handful of dirt and smeared it on his face. Then, he signaled the other 4 people not to move, and he took the opportunity to approach Caspar, who was standing on the high platform and shouting to command the battle. "Hey!" Wolf shouted, and with his sword in hand, he chopped off Caspar's head in front of tens of thousands of people. Then, the whole battlefield fell silent. Wolf took the opportunity to pinch his throat and shouted, "Caspar is dead, let's surrender." Suddenly, the morale of the more than 20,000 peasant soldiers who were still resisting plummeted, and many people were in despair. Many peasant soldiers standing in front of the resistance, after learning the news that Caspar was killed, involuntarily put down their weapons. But Caspar's group of buddies were angry. "You bastard, you dare to kill the leader, I will kill you." After that, dozens of officers who had a very good relationship with Caspar and served as officers in the army rushed towards Wolf with swords. But Wolf was not stupid. He did not stand there and wait for the other party to chop him. Instead, he held Caspar's head and ran towards the manor. The dozens of blacksmiths who were chasing him from behind were unable to catch up with him in time because there were many soldiers blocking them. There was no way. When Caspar organized the resistance before, he arranged his confidants to lead the troops to resist, and the back was very empty. Wolf carried Caspar's head and ran directly to the small castle in the valley that had not been taken down before. The owner of the castle saw that Wolf was one of his own, so he took him up in a hanging basket. Seeing that Caspar was killed, Duke Ulrich was not a fool, and immediately ordered a general attack. Thousands of Württemberg soldiers shouted, "Surrender and no killing," and rushed forward. Seeing the other leader being killed, the Württemberg soldiers were in high spirits. On the contrary, the morale of the peasant uprising army fell to a low point. After a fight, except for a few people who were still resisting, most of the other peasant uprising soldiers laid down their weapons and surrendered. In this battle, the only ones who were still resisting were the earliest group of poor Conrad, members of Caspar, totaling more than 3,000 people. But the Württemberg army dispatched 400 knights and 5,000 North Sea infantry to focus on attacking those stubborn resistors. As a result, more than half of the more than 3,000 core members of Poor Conrad were killed, and half were injured and lost their resistance. In addition, there were many peasant soldiers who were killed and injured, more than 2,000, because they trampled on each other when the army collapsed. In the end, the Württemberg army captured a total of 27,000 intact peasant soldiers and more than 3,000 wounded. The actual number of deaths was less than 1,800. There was no other way. The commander was beheaded in front of everyone. This was too damaging to morale. Not to mention the scattered peasant army, even the regular army could easily collapse. At night, in the castle in the valley, after attending the welcome banquet hosted by the castle owner Baron Waldemar, Duke Ulrich was a little worried in the guest room. Baron Waldemar was a neutral noble in the Duchy of Württemberg. He was not loyal to Duke Ulrich, but he did not oppose him either. Such neutral nobles were dispensable to Duke Ulrich. Therefore, they were also on the list of targets to be eliminated by the peasant army. Of course, he was lucky. This time he happened to meet the arrival of the army and was not broken into by the peasant army. If the army had arrived half a day later, everything would be hard to say. At this time, Wolf, who had escaped into the castle after chopping off Caspar's head during the day, stood in front of Duke Ulrich. He had been exposed. After escaping into the castle during the day, he had to reveal his identity to Baron Waldemar. Then, his identity became clear. Of course, he would never admit that he was Henry, the leader of the rebel heavy cavalry. Anyway, when he killed Caspar, he smeared his face with yellow mud and deliberately did not speak in a normal voice. "Duke, what are you worried about? We have won a great victory this time." Wolf was a little confused. In front of his confidant, Duke Ulrich did not hide it. "I have reached a prisoner sale agreement with Grand Duke Marin of the North Sea, but I only have 27,000 intact prisoners of war. In order to deter those unruly people, thousands of people will definitely be publicly executed. In this way, I can only sell 26,000 people to Grand Duke Marin at most. Calculated based on one able-bodied man per peasant household, 26,000 people can only be sold for 780,000 golden gold coins, 30 gold coins per household. This is not enough to repay my debt of millions of gold coins." Wolf said strangely, "That's not right, didn't the rebels loot property worth more than 500,000 golden gold coins? Now it's all in your hands." Duke Ulrich glared at him and said, "What do you know? After the victory of this war, I need to take out half of the spoils to reward the army and pay commissions. Wolf scratched his head and said, "That's enough, half of the spoils are more than 250,000 gold coins, plus the 780,000, it's enough to pay the debt." Duke Ulrich roared angrily, "You idiot, I won't live like this anymore." Obviously, the extravagant Duke Ulrich was not willing to use all his income to pay off his debts. Because he also needed a lot of money to maintain his huge expenses. Wolf finally understood what Duke Ulrich meant. He thought there were too few captive peasants. Sure enough, Duke Ulrich scolded, "You idiots, why don't you persuade that idiot Caspar to capture more peasants to join the rebels? If there were another 10,000 peasants and sold them to Grand Duke Marin, I would be rich. I wouldn't have to worry about the subsequent expenses." I did persuade him, but that bastard Caspar despised those peasants who were not strong enough to waste food, and only wanted the strong ones, and didn't accept the weak ones. Wolf said aggrievedly. "Damn it, now the trouble is here. You, help me think of a way to increase the number of prisoners of war." Duke Ulrich said angrily. Wolf thought for a long time and suddenly came up with an idea. "Your Excellency the Duke, how about we deliberately let Chapman, Undercover Charlie, and the other 4 go? At the same time, let go of a group of their accomplices. I have been exposed, but the other 4 have not. You can let Chapman go and let him lead the light cavalry to escape at night. Then, go and attack those manors that do not belong to your faction. In addition to looting, focus on coercing the peasants. This time, without the presence of a superior like Caspar, Chapman can completely give orders on his own and specifically coerce the population to get as many serfs as possible." Chapter 1586, Escape and Coercion. Duke Ulrich suddenly remembered that he had forgotten to order Chapman and the other 4 to be taken out of the prisoner of war camp. Now was just right, they had not been exposed yet, and they could continue to make use of their remaining energy. Will they be exposed if we let the 4 of them take the lead? In the future, they will return to my side. If they are recognized as having led the rebels, they will be finished. Duke Ulrich hesitated. Wolf said confidently, "Don't worry, sir, Chapman and the other 4 are different from me. I don't grow a beard, and the 4 of them have thick beards. During this period, in order to blend into the rebels and not be recognized, the 4 of them have grown big beards. As long as they don't shave their beards and make their faces a little dirty, no one can recognize them. When they come back, they can just shave their beards clean. As for me, I don't grow a beard, and after being exposed this time, it is not convenient for me to participate again." This is also the reason why Wolf took off his marked clothes and smeared yellow mud on his face when he tried to kill Caspar before. He doesn't grow a beard and doesn't know how to disguise himself. In order not to be recognized, he had to do this. As for Chapman and the other 2, their beards grow fast. As long as they don't shave for a long time and their faces are a little dirty, it will be difficult for others to recognize them. Duke Ulrich nodded and said, "Okay, when I arrange to escort the prisoners back tomorrow, I will deliberately send the weakest conscript team to escort their team at the end. I remember that Chapman is now the deputy captain of the rebel light cavalry, right? Then I will take the opportunity to let the entire light cavalry team run away." Wolf shook his head again and again. "No, Chapman is only the deputy captain, and there is a Captain Gates above him. If everyone is released, then this team will still listen to the Captain Gates instead of Chapman." Duke Ulrich said, "That's easy. Tomorrow morning I will order the captain named Gates to be taken away separately. We will execute them together later. Then, you secretly send someone to tell Chapman and the other 4 about our plan. Tomorrow, the rebel light cavalry team they are in will be the last to be escorted to Stuttgart. I will arrange an officer who likes to drink to lead a team of conscripts with poor combat effectiveness to carry out this task. At that time, you will secretly have someone loosen the rope that Chapman tied up, so that he can run away with his men at night. As for that officer and those conscripts, I will treat them as spoils of war." The next morning, Duke Ulrich and most of the soldiers escorted most of the prisoners and left first, leaving a small number of prisoners and some soldiers to escort them in batches. The leader of the light cavalry squad that Chapman was in was a drunkard knight named Hesset. The 300 soldiers he led were also conscripts with poor combat effectiveness. Of course, Hesset and his party were not escorting all 2,200 peasant army light cavalry prisoners. 300 of them had died in the previous battle, but only 500 people. You know, these 2,200 light cavalry were the elite of the rebels. In the previous battle, they also caused a lot of trouble to the government troops. If they were all released, it would become a considerable threat. But if they were released less, Chapman would not have the power to attack those manors. Therefore, after thinking again and again, Duke Ulrich gave 500 people and put them alone at the end to facilitate escape. Before leaving, Duke Ulrich also deliberately gave Knight Hesset a few bottles of fine wine. Sure enough, when the team of Knight Hesset, who set out in the afternoon, camped in a small village at night, they couldn't help but take out the fine wine rewarded by Duke Ulrich and drank it. These wines are rye ergotta that Duke Ulrich got from the North Sea Kingdom, which is quite strong. Then, after 2 bottles of rye ergotta, Knight Hesset successfully passed out. In the middle of the night, Chapman, who was tied up and thrown into a large yard, suddenly opened his eyes, then moved his hands and untied the ropes on his hands. The ropes on his hands were made by Wolf, who had someone specially sent to tie a slip knot for him, just to make it easier for him to break free. Moreover, the person who was sent to contact him last night also hid a dagger in his boots. After breaking free from the ropes on his hands, Chapman took out a dagger from his boots under the surprised gaze of other awake prisoners nearby, first cut the ropes on his feet and then began to cut the ropes on the hands and feet of other prisoners. 2 hours later, the 200 people in the yard regained their freedom. "Lord Charles, what should we do now?" The prisoners who regained their freedom surrounded Chapman. Chapman said seriously, "Everyone, find a weapon that you can use in the yard first. Sticks and bricks will do. Then, we will climb over the wall and get rid of the 2 guards outside the gate. At the same time, we will attack another large yard and rescue more than 200 other brothers." "What if the enemy finds us?" a prisoner asked in a low voice. Chapman waved his hand and whispered, "I saw it during the day. There are only 300 people guarding our team, and they are basically conscripted soldiers composed of farmers. Their combat effectiveness is not better than ours. We are the elite of the rebels. How can we be afraid of them? As for that night, I smelled alcohol from a distance. I guess he is drunk now. As long as we get out of this yard and grab weapons, we are not afraid of those idiots at all." After completing the mobilization, Chapman led everyone to climb over the wall carefully and quietly. Then, Chapman and another undercover knight, Hinton, relied on their good martial arts to quietly lurk outside the gate and killed the 3 conscripted soldiers guarding the gate. Afterwards, the 2 of them quietly lurked outside another courtyard gate and killed 4 guards who were sleeping. Then, they rescued more than 200 other rebel light cavalry prisoners in the courtyard, including 2 other undercover knights, Leo and Dim. Then, after the 4 undercover knights got the weapons of the gate guards, they led a group of light cavalry prisoners holding sticks and bricks to raid the main house of the manor where the guards lived. Under the leadership of Chapman and the other 4, the 200 or 300 hastily awakened conscripts were powerless to resist. Knight Hesset was shaken awake by his men, but he was still hungover and his brain was not clear at this time. When he staggered into the hall, he was killed by the oncoming undercover knight Leo. Normally, Leo and him were equally skilled. However, Hesset was drunk and had not yet sobered up, so he was easily killed by Leo of the same level. Seeing Knight Hesset being killed, the remaining more than 200 conscripts collapsed immediately. Either they fled in panic or they laid down their weapons and surrendered. Chapman did not make things difficult for them, but instead confiscated their weapons and equipped the 493 light cavalry prisoners. 7 of them were killed or injured during the raid because they had no swords and were not as well equipped as the conscripts. Then, the 4 reorganized the team overnight and fled in the direction that the peasant army had intended to rob before dawn. When Stuttgart received the news that 500 rebel prisoners had escaped in the afternoon, Chapman had already led his men to capture a manor that he had planned to attack before. In accordance with Duke Ulrich's will, after capturing the manor, Chapman and his 4 men not only killed the owner of the manor, but also forcibly conscripted all 300 able-bodied men in the manor into the rebel team. Afterwards, the team continued to attack the next manor and continued to coerce all the able-bodied men in the next manor. According to Duke Ulrich's plan, their 4 missions were to coerce all the able-bodied men in all the manors along the way. Then, they deliberately lost to the government army and let Duke Ulrich exchange those able-bodied men for money from the North Sea Kingdom. Chapter 1587 The situation in Hungary. People are different, and rebels are also different. The poor Conrad peasant uprising army in Württemberg lacked professional officers, so even if there were many people, it was difficult to form a strong combat effectiveness. Therefore, it collapsed at the touch of a button when facing the official army. The Hungarian peasant uprising army was completely different, because the Hungarian peasant uprising army had a group of professional officers. At the beginning, in order to form the Crusades, the Holy See invited a group of middle and lower-level officers of the Kingdom of Hungary, such as Dora George, who were of noble origin, as leaders of the Crusades. Although these officers did not have any famous generals, they all had relatively professional military qualities. Perhaps they lacked the experience of commanding thousands of troops, but their basic skills were still relatively solid. After capturing Szeged, an important town in southern Hungary, they used it as a base to strengthen their strength as a capital to confront the Kingdom of Hungary. Why did Dora George choose Szeged in the south as the base camp to fight against the Kingdom of Hungary? In addition to the rich wealth and various supplies in this important town, the large number of herdsmen nearby was also an important reason for his coming here. The Kingdom of Hungary is somewhat similar to the Ukrainian region. Its southern region, like southern Ukraine, is threatened by powerful pagan regimes. Southern Ukraine is threatened by the Crimean Khanate, while southern Hungary is threatened by the more powerful Ottoman Turkey. Of course, although the enemy is stronger, Hungary's ability to counterattack is much stronger than Ukraine. Mainly, Ukraine is a remote area of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania is not willing to invest too much to confront the Crimean Khanate. The Kingdom of Hungary is different. They cannot give in. Giving in means the fall of their hometown. Therefore, although the enemy is stronger, the Kingdom of Hungary protects its territory much better than Ukraine. But anyway, because the southern region is threatened by the powerful Ottoman Turkey, the local Hungarians cannot farm with peace of mind, so they have to maintain the tradition of the Magyars' nomadism. Once they encounter a large-scale invasion by the Turks, the herders in southern Hungary will drive their livestock away. Therefore, the Great Plain of Hungary, near the border in the south, is dominated by herders. Only in the relatively safe northern region is it the main agricultural area. If the threat from the Ottoman Turks was not so great, perhaps the huge Hungarian plain would have become the top granary in Europe. The reason why Dora George brought his army to the south was because he had his eyes on the large number of herders in the southern region. Among these herders, he could recruit a lot of hussars. This was indeed the case. After he brought 20,000 people from two tribes to the southern plains, he quickly formed a powerful army of more than 50,000 people by half deceiving and half forcing. There were as many as 30,000 light cavalry composed of herders alone. However, Dora George also encountered a very embarrassing problem: too many people and insufficient military rations. In the southern Hungarian region near Szeged, due to the threat of the Ottoman Turks, a large number of grain fields were not reclaimed. Therefore, the local grain production was insufficient. To maintain a large-scale cavalry, a lot of food is needed, and eating grass alone is not enough. Due to the lack of food, Dora George had to stop recruiting cavalry after recruiting 30,000 cavalry. If there was enough food, he might have recruited tens of thousands of cavalry. Due to the problem of insufficient food and grass, Dora George had to start leading his army northward. However, at this time, the official army prepared by Vladislaus II to suppress the uprising was also in place. When Dora George's army began to move northward to the grain-producing area in northern Hungary, Vladislaus II had already ordered the Hungarian noble coalition forces of about 7,000 soldiers from Pest to enter the main traffic route that Dora George's army needed to pass through to move north, Kecskemét, an important town located between the Danube and the Tisza River. This is the main traffic route for Dora George's army to move northward. Although the Hungarian plains are vast, it is also the most important transit point from Szeged to Pest in the north. Moreover, with 7,000 noble coalition forces stationed in Kecskemét, Dora George's army did not dare to bypass it and move north easily. Why? Because if Dora George's army went north regardless of the consequences, and was intercepted by Marin's army, the Polish winged hussars, and the main force of the Bohemian army, then the 7,000 noble coalition forces in Kecskemét would probably attack from behind, making the peasant uprising army attack from both sides. Therefore, for the sake of safety, Dora George had to stop and send a large army to besiege Kecskemét first. Anyway, there were only 7,000 people in Kecskemét, and Dora George's main force had more than 50,000 people. Moreover, capturing the Hungarian nobles in the city would be very beneficial to the negotiations between the rebels and the Hungarian court. Therefore, whether for the safety of the back or for the nobles in the 7,000 noble coalition forces, Dora George hoped to conquer Kecskemét and capture the noble captives in the city. In fact, as a low-ranking officer of the Kingdom of Hungary who was born in aristocracy, Dora George had the advantage of knowing military affairs, but he also had a big disadvantage. Like Song Jiang, Dora George hoped to be recruited. Of course, Dora George did not want to be a court official like Song Jiang, but hoped to rely on the tens of thousands of troops in his hands to become a duke of the Kingdom of Hungary and get a large fiefdom. He even thought about where the fiefdom would be: Szeged. In order to achieve this goal, if he could capture the hundreds of nobles in the 7,000 noble coalition forces in the city, he would be close to success. Dora George even had an ambition in his heart, that is, if he could get the support of the Hungarian nobles like Matthias I, he might not be able to covet the throne of Hungary. At the beginning, Matthias I did not have royal blood. However, because of the support of the Hungarian nobles, Matthias I was elected king of Hungary at the age of 14. Then, he formed the famous Black Army, which traveled across Central Europe, beat Frederick III, the father of Vladislaus II and Maximilian I, so that he could not take care of himself, and seized a large area of territory, even Vienna. If Matthias I had not married the wrong wife and failed to give birth to a legitimate son, God knows what the situation in Europe would be like now. As a noble son of the Kingdom of Hungary, Matthias I was the idol of Doreo George. And based on the experience of Matthias I, Doreo George understood that if he wanted to become the second Matthias I, he must first capture the Hungarian nobles guarding the city of Kecskemét. Then, force them to support him as king. At the very least, they must admit that they are the Duke of Szeged. But he didn't know that the more than 100 nobles of the Kingdom of Hungary in Kecskemét were actually baits deliberately left for him by Władysław II. Władysław II could guess some of Dora George's thoughts, so he deliberately sent the noble coalition to station in Kecskemét. For no other reason, it was to delay Dora George's army. Because at this time, the main force of the Hungarian official army was doing its best to encircle and suppress the rebel army in the northern mountainous area. Chapter 1588 The Temptation of the Throne and Title. In line with the principle of starting with the easy and then the difficult, after the arrival of Wagner, the commander of the Second Army of the North Sea Kingdom, and Jürgen, the commander of the Cossack Cavalry Corps, in Prague, Władysław II discussed with them and decided on a strategy of first eliminating the rebels in the northern mountainous areas of Hungary and then going south to fight a decisive battle with the enemy's main force. The official army responsible for suppressing the uprising this time consisted of three parts. The first part was the Second Army of the North Sea Kingdom and the Cossack Cavalry Corps, which was the strongest part. The second part was the 5,000 Polish winged cavalry sent by King Sigismund I of Poland, led by Polish General Masinski. He was Sigismund I's confidant and the commander-in-chief of the Polish winged cavalry. The last part was the 10,000 troops gathered by the Kingdom of Bohemia, led by General Euphorusi, a general of the Kingdom of Bohemia. Before the expedition, Władysław II held a meeting with four generals, Wagner, Jürgen, Masinski and Euphorusi, and finally formulated a tactic of first eliminating more than 30,000 rebels in the north and then eliminating the main force of the rebels in the south. However, how to prevent the main force of the southern rebels from coming to support the northern rebels has become a big problem. Because, from Szeged to Pest, the capital of the Kingdom of Hungary, it is only 170 kilometers. To the northern mountainous area where the northern rebels are located, it is only more than 200 kilometers. The main force of the rebels has 30,000 light cavalry. As long as they speed up their journey, they can come here in 2 days, and no later than 3 days. If the opponent's 30,000 cavalry come and form a pincer attack with the rebels in the northern mountainous area, it will be very difficult to deal with. Therefore, before eliminating the rebels in the northern mountainous area, an effective method is needed to delay the main force of the southern rebels. After a long discussion for half a day, everyone speculated in detail on Dora George's psychological state and concluded that he would definitely be interested in those Hungarian nobles. Therefore, Władysław II ordered the Hungarian nobles in Pest to send most of the nobles and lead 7,000 troops to station in Kecskemét, located between Pest and Szeged, to attract Dora George's attention. Sure enough, when the main force of 30,000 government troops launched an attack on more than 30,000 rebels in the northern mountains of Hungary, Dora George and his more than 50,000 troops were firmly attracted to Kecskemét, where the nobles gathered. Of course, in order to ensure that Kecskemét would not be easily conquered by the rebels, Władysław II ordered the only 900 musketeers in the Bohemian Kingdom army to ride south on horseback and join the team guarding Kecskemét. These 900 musketeers were formed by Władysław II in recent years in imitation of the North Sea Army. After all, Marin's phalanx performed very well in many wars. Therefore, Władysław II couldn't help but collect a group of craftsmen, forged a batch of matchlock guns, and formed a team of 900 musketeers. This time, Władysław II originally planned to let 900 matchlock gunners fight with the army. But Wagner, the commander of the Second Army of the North Sea Kingdom, thought that it would be more effective for these 900 musketeers to participate in the defense of Kecskemét. After all, the musketeers were protected by the city walls, and their power was doubled. So Władysław II sent them to Kecskemét to support the Hungarian noble coalition. Moreover, before setting off, Wagner suddenly asked Chow, a minor officer of the musketeers, to bring a message to Count Pecci, the leader of the Hungarian noble coalition army. Then, when Dora George's army besieged Kecskemét, Count Pecci shouted out that message, "Come on, Dora, capture this city and capture us. As long as you can capture me, I will choose you as the king of Hungary, like Matthias I." Hearing this, Dora George's mind exploded with a boom, and he lost his mind. King. King like Matthias I. Ambition exploded in Dora George's mind. He had such an idea in the first place, but after being provoked by Count Pecci, he could no longer restrain himself. Then, Dora George no longer cared about going north for rescue, even if the northern region sent a pigeon for help. At this time, Dora George was thinking about breaking through Kecskemét and capturing more than 100 Hungarian nobles in the city. Then, relying on their support, he became a man like Matthias I. However, ideals are beautiful, but reality is cruel. The rebel army formed by Doreo George lacked siege equipment and professional officers to command sieges. As for the more than 30,000 Hungarian pastoral cavalry, they may be good at field battles, but they can attack cities. In addition, the Hungarian noble coalition has the help of 900 musketeers. Although the battle to defend the city is tense, it is not dangerous. And in the mountainous areas of northern Hungary, the battle of 30,000 official troops was also relatively smooth. Because most of the 10,000 soldiers of the Second Legion of the North Sea Kingdom were mountain people recruited by Marin from the mountainous areas of southern Germany. These veterans of the Second Legion who came from mountain people should not be too familiar with the mountains. On the other hand, most of the more than 30,000 Hungarian rebels in the northern mountains came from the plains near the city of Pest, and were far less familiar with the mountains than the mountain veterans of the Second Legion of the North Sea Kingdom. Some of the local mountaineers recruited by the rebels were new soldiers and could not play a big role at all. With such a huge difference, although it seemed that the northern army of the Hungarian rebels was fighting at home, they were passively beaten everywhere. Under the leadership of the Second Army of the North Sea Kingdom, which was mainly composed of mountain veterans, the 30,000 officers and soldiers fought bravely, gradually compressed the living space of the northern army of the Hungarian rebels, and won victory after victory. At this time, Dóra George, whose mind was filled with thoughts of being elected as king and becoming the second Matthias I, was still attacking Kecskemét. Obviously, the temptation of being a king made Dóra George, the leader of the peasant rebels, lose his mind. His subordinates probably saw something wrong and tried to persuade him. But Dóra George was determined to be the king at this time and would not listen to his advice at all. On the contrary, he persuaded his men to listen to him. If I am elected as the king of Hungary, I will make you nobles. The comrades in the northern mountains will not have much trouble. At worst, they can deal with the enemy for a long time because they are familiar with the terrain. They can hold on until we conquer Kecskemét and then come to reinforce. Then, magically, many officers of the rebel army who originally tried to persuade Dóra George were persuaded by Dóra George. After all, Dóra George promised a lot of titles of Duke, Earl, Viscount, and Baron, which stunned his ignorant men. No wonder, Dóra George himself was only from a small noble family. Other officers were either from small noble families or simply from civilians. If they were children of great nobles, they would not join the peasant uprising at all. These officers of humble origins have always looked up to those great nobles and envied and hated them. When he heard that he had the chance to become a noble, he stopped thinking and was convinced by Dóra George. Then, he went crazy with him. Chapter 1589 Bribery. Dóra George and his main officers went crazy. Even the two military priests, Lavrenzy and Varnava, were fooled by Dóra George with the promise of the position of bishop. They were originally sent by the Holy See to fool the Hungarians to fight Turkey, but they were not good enough and were fooled by Dóra George. In fact, Dóra George in this time and space is very different from Dóra George in the original time and space. In the original history, Dóra George also led a large group of troops to besiege Szeged, an important town in southern Hungary, but failed to take it down. Then, Dóra George led the army to fight in Zanad and captured Zanad, and also announced the establishment of a republic of equality for all in Zanad. Zanad, also known as Csened, is a small town located in Transylvania, northwest of Romania in later generations, near the Hungarian border. But in this era, there is no Romania. And Transylvania also belongs to the powerful kingdom of Hungary. It's just that it's probably because of the butterfly effect brought about by Marin's crossing. In this time and space, Dóra George actually successfully conquered Szeged, an important town in southern Hungary, and obtained a large amount of supplies in Szeged. Therefore, Dóra George did not march to Zanad in the southeast, but marched directly northward, intending to support the northern army and put pressure on Pest. Because there was no siege of Zanad, and no anger to kill all the local nobles and bishops. Therefore, Dóra George did not completely break with the aristocracy in this time and space, nor did he establish any republic. Therefore, he still had the opportunity to reach a compromise with the aristocracy. And the words that Wagner instructed the Bohemian musketeers to bring completely ignited Dóra George's ambitions and swallowed up his reason. In fact, after the capture of Szeged, many people found some clues. In the warehouse of Szeged, Dóra George found a batch of clothing and equipment left by the famous Hungarian Black Army left by Matthias I. These were the excess supplies prepared in Szeged when Matthias I went on an expedition to Turkey. At that time, as the first important town in southern Hungary, 5,000 sets of replaceable clothing, as well as related weapons and flags were prepared for the Hungarian Black Army on the southern expedition. But later, the Hungarian Black Army did not pass through Szeged, but went directly to Transylvania in the southeast where the battle broke out. These 5,000 sets of equipment were left and sealed in the warehouse. Moreover, with the death of Matthias I in 1490, the foolish Hungarian nobles disbanded the powerful Hungarian Black Army of 30,000 people just to save money. But from then on, Hungary lost the ability to beat Turkey and could only passively take a beating. Because of the disbandment of the Black Army, the 5,000 sets of spare clothing and flags of the Black Army in the Szeged arsenal were never touched again. Instead, the spare Magyar scimitars of the Black Army were taken away, and only the clothing and flags of the Black Army were retained, and no one moved them again. Decades later, these clothing and flags were unexpectedly well preserved. When Dóra George conquered Szeged and got these clothes and flags, his mentality changed completely. Originally, Dóra George was a radical revolutionary who planned to lead Hungarian peasants to resist the oppression of Hungarian nobles. But the moment he got the Black Army uniforms and flags, Dóra George suddenly remembered that he, who now has tens of thousands of troops, is similar to Matthias I and his army. So, from that moment on, Dóra George no longer fiercely opposed the nobles, but began to plan to use Szeged as a base to make great achievements. He prepared two plans in his mind. One was to force the Hungarian nobles to bow their heads and recognize his identity as the Duke of Szeged, and then, with Szeged as the base camp, slowly develop strength and eventually reach the height of Matthias I. This is a more stable plan, but the disadvantage is that it takes a long time. However, Dora George is less than 40 years old and has plenty of time. The second plan is more radical. That is to capture most of the Hungarian nobles and force them to elect themselves as the King of Hungary by force. Then, he directly started to copy the path of Matthias I. Originally, the second plan was just a backup. But Dora George did not expect that Władysław II would be so bold as to send half of the nobles in Pest to Kecskemét to stop him from going north. Seeing a large number of nobles gathered in Kecskemét, Dora George saw the possibility of realizing the second plan. With the instigation of Count Pecci's words, Dora George lost his mind and was determined to conquer Kecskemét and capture the Hungarian nobles in the city. Just when Dora George was attacking Kecskemét regardless of anything, two people were having a secret conversation in an inconspicuous tent in the camp of Dora George's army. How about it? Mr. Benayan, do you agree with my suggestion? This is a withdrawal slip for 10,000 ducats. You can withdraw it at any time at the Bank of Venice in the west. The fat man named Benayan immediately stared at the paper in the other's hand with extremely greedy eyes. Benayan was a Jew, originally a Jewish businessman in Pest. It happened that his business failed and went bankrupt before. After learning that the Holy See sent people to form a crusade to Turkey, the fat man who was already penniless immediately joined the crusade and volunteered to be a quartermaster. After all, no matter what, as a Jewish businessman, Benayan could write and calculate, and was the most suitable quartermaster in the entire crusade. Seeing that no one else could do the job, Dora George gave him the position of quartermaster. Benayan was also very happy at the time. You know, the crusades could burn, kill and loot after arriving on Turkish soil. At that time, as a quartermaster, there would be a lot of benefits to be gained. But what he didn't expect was that because of the conflict with the Hungarian nobles, Dora George broke up with the Kingdom of Hungary in anger. At that time, Benayan was very panicked and afraid that the rebels would fail. After all, from ancient times to the present, since the Spartacus uprising, there has been no successful case of peasant uprisings in Europe. Fortunately, the rebels were successful because of their huge scale, and they also conquered Szeged, an important town in southern Hungary, which made him temporarily forget the fear of failure. But then, a man named Zahavi, who was also a Jewish businessman, joined the rebels and mixed into the quartermaster team. One day, this proud Jewish businessman contacted him and offered the title of a knight of fiefdom and the conditions of fiefdom, hoping to bribe Benayan and cooperate with him to do something. But at that time, the rebels did not show signs of decline, and after some thought, Benayan did not agree for the time being. However, as if to leave a way out for himself, Benayan did not report Zahavi. Later, Zahavi knew that the conditions he brought could not impress the other party, so he kept increasing the stakes. After many attempts, until today, in addition to the original title of a knight of fiefdom and land, an additional condition of 10,000 ducats of gold coins has been added. Sure enough, Benayan is worthy of being a Jew and is most sensitive to money. Hearing that he could get 10,000 ducats of gold coins, Benayan's eyes almost shone with gold. However, he seemed to be hesitating about something and was reluctant to make a decision. At this time, Zahavi gritted his teeth and threw out another blockbuster. Mr. Benayan, His Majesty Władysław II has long seen through Dora George's ambition to become the second Matthias I. Therefore, this Hungarian noble in Kecskemét is actually a bait thrown by His Majesty to lure Dora George into being fooled. You see, Dora George has obviously been fooled. When the northern army is wiped out by the government troops, Dora George will surely be doomed. If you continue to follow him, you will be executed sooner or later. It is better to surrender to His Majesty. Benayan was shocked at first after hearing what Zahavi said. Then he thought of something and hesitated. After hesitating for a long time, he finally nodded, "Okay, I am willing to cooperate with you." Happy cooperation. Zahavi smiled. Then, he handed the withdrawal slip of 10,000 ducats to Dora George's quartermaster Benayan. Chapter 1590, The Placement of the Scottish Highland Soldiers and Their Dependents. After bribing Benayan, the quartermaster of Dora George, Zahavi, the spy sent by Marin, did not immediately arrange for Benayan to use croton powder on the war horses of Dora George's rebel cavalry. Because at this time, the main force of the government army was still in the northern mountainous area to suppress the northern army of the rebel army. It was useless to drug the war horses of Dora George's cavalry at this time. Even without war horses, Dora George still had more than 50,000 infantry, which was stronger than the 7,000 noble coalition forces in Kecskemét. Therefore, Zahavi simply asked Benayan to personally manage the distribution of war horse feed in the past few days. In this way, it is convenient for him to be familiar with the relevant procedures. When croton powder is needed, it can be arranged calmly to avoid mistakes. Once the decisive battle comes, the war horses of Dora George's 30,000 hussars all eat croton powder and have diarrhea, then there is no need to fight this battle. Without war horses, the hussars who were born from herdsmen were not as effective as ordinary spear infantry. The encirclement and suppression battle in the northern mountains of Hungary continued, and the siege of Kecskemét was also in full swing. But this side will not end for a while. After all, the difficulty of fighting in the northern mountains is not the battle, but the difficult terrain. Even though most of the Second Corps are experienced and strong soldiers from the southern mountains of Germany, they are not familiar with the local terrain. It will take a while to eliminate the local rebels. At this time, the large-scale rebels in the northern mountains were basically defeated and dispersed. However, because there are a large number of local people in the northern mountains in the rebel army, under their guidance, the remaining soldiers of the northern army of the rebel army were divided into small units of up to a few hundred people, running around in the northern mountains, leaving the government troops who came to suppress them helpless. In desperation, Wagner, the commander of the Second Corps of the North Sea Kingdom, who was the main force to suppress the uprising, proposed the strategy of building bunkers. He proposed to build a building combining a bunker and a beacon tower in some important transportation hubs that had been captured in the northern mountains. In this way, as long as the defenders in the bunker saw the remnants of the rebels appear, they could light the beacon tower and inform the nearby government troops to intercept the fleeing remnants of the rebels in time. Sure enough, after this method was implemented, 7 or 8 remnants of the rebels who went out of the mountains to find food supplies were discovered in time. Under the guidance of the beacon smoke, the government troops dispatched cavalry in time to surround them and achieved brilliant results. Subsequently, this kind of building combining bunkers and beacon towers began to be built on a large scale on various transportation routes in the northern mountains of Hungary. The living space of the remnants of the rebels active in the mountains was greatly compressed. Because they dare not easily go to the towns near the transportation hub to replenish food and other daily necessities, the remaining soldiers of the northern route army of the rebellion army are now living a miserable life. They are often hungry and have to be on guard against the government troops entering the mountains to search. The most terrifying thing is that Wagner, the commander of the Second Army of the North Sea Kingdom, has also transferred a police dog unit from the North Sea Kingdom. This police dog unit, composed of hundreds of Alsatian wolfhounds, is specially used to track the remnants of the rebels hidden in the mountains. It can be said that under the joint suppression of various means such as bunker blockade and wolfhound tracking, the defeat of the northern route army of the rebellion army seems to be not far away. In the North Sea Kingdom, since King Edward of England hurriedly ended the war of conquest of Ireland, except for the 5,000 people of the Fourth Army, the 1,500 Cossacks sent later, and the troops of Adler's headquarters, other troops have withdrawn, including Hanks's Sixth Army. When the fleet of the Sixth Army arrived at the port of Emden, Marin came to greet them in person. Marin warmly welcomed their return. Why? Because the North Sea Kingdom was short of troops at this time. Since the 10,000 people and 5,000 Cossack cavalry of the Second Legion went south to support Hungary, the huge North Sea Kingdom was left with only half of the First Legion's 5,000 people, 5,000 police officers transferred from various places, and 10,000 people from the Third Legion. As for the newly recruited 20,000 civilians, Marin never regarded them as regular troops at all. Because these people were just here to make up the numbers and boost their courage. In any case, these 20,000 civilians are farmers, and the fields in Marin's manor still need them to cultivate, so they can't really be regarded as standing troops. And Hanks came back with the 6th Legion, which finally made Marin feel relieved. Because Marin finally didn't have to worry about the lack of troops in the southern part of the North Sea Kingdom. Especially the 2 Brunswick principalities that were only obtained last year, the current rule is not stable enough. Therefore, as soon as Hanks' 6th Army came back, Marin hurriedly mobilized them to go south to the city of Goslar to deter the southern region and nearby neighboring countries. But before going south, Hanks suddenly proposed that the Scottish soldiers of the 6th Army were homesick. It turned out that the long-term battles in the wilderness and swamps of Ireland made the Scottish soldiers a little impatient. At the same time, it also triggered their homesickness. Every night, the sad sound of bagpipes could always be heard in the tents of the Scottish soldiers. Hanks obviously felt that the morale of the army was a little unstable, so he hoped that Marin could help solve it. Marin thought for a while and ordered, "You arrange it and have someone count the home addresses of those Scottish soldiers. Then, I will send people to Scotland to bring their families to the North Sea. Then, they will be uniformly settled near the city of Goslar and build a manor. In the future, you can take turns to give those Scottish soldiers a holiday and let them visit their relatives in the military manner." Hanks was shocked. You know, it would cost a lot of money to take over and settle the families of 7,000 Scottish soldiers. But Marin didn't care. Anyway, he didn't need to really pay a lot of cash. Many materials can be directly exchanged for food. Moreover, Marin also plans to use cheap adobe houses for the manor houses for the military families. This kind of house has a low cost and is fast to build. Even if a few Scottish military manors are built, it won't cost too much money. What? Why don't you let those Scottish soldiers go back to visit their families? Don't be funny, Marin is just afraid that those Scottish soldiers will never look back after they go back. Scotland is full of mountains. If those Scottish soldiers go back and become deserters and take their families into the mountains, Marin will have nowhere to cry. Moreover, these Scottish soldiers who have undergone strict modern military training in the North Sea will become a huge security risk in Scotland once they escape. If someone organizes them, they will immediately become a powerful resistance force in the Kingdom of Scotland. In the future, Caesar will unite the Kingdom of Scotland. How could Marin leave hidden dangers for his son? Therefore, Marin would rather be a little troublesome and spend a lot of money to build several Scottish military estates near the city of Goslar, and would not allow those Scottish soldiers to go back to visit their relatives. Moreover, because Marin moved most of the nobles of these newly conquered vassal states to the province of Bremen, many of the original noble estates were vacant, which could be used to accommodate the families of the Scottish Highland soldiers. In the future, Marin plans to exchange the population of Scotland and Ireland. In this way, those Scots or Irish who left their hometowns had to keep their tails between their legs for a long time. Because, no one dares to be arrogant after leaving their hometown. By the time they finally settled down, the Hoffman family had complete control over both places. Chapter 1591, Quantity First. In fact, Marin has always been a headache for Scotland. Scotland is at a high latitude. Although it is not particularly cold due to the North Atlantic warm current, it is not very warm either. The climate here is mainly wet and cold. Only the eastern region is not so humid because of the mountains in the west. But the problem is that there are too many mountains in Scotland, most of which are mountains. Like the Highland county that Edward gave to Marin, it is said that the area is as high as 26,000 square kilometers, but most of it is mountainous, and it is completely impossible to engage in agriculture. Moreover, due to climatic reasons, only a small number of river valleys here can be used to grow cold-resistant crops such as rye and oats. For the rest of the area, not to mention the mountainous areas, the hilly areas can only be used to raise livestock. Therefore, in Scotland, the cattle and sheep breeding industry is actually very developed. However, although there are many Scottish cattle and sheep, they are very pitfalls. Because the local cattle and sheep breeds are not good. Because it has just been unified with England, Scotland has not yet begun to introduce excellent cattle and sheep breeds on a large scale. Therefore, the current Scottish sheep breeds are very ordinary. They do not produce much milk, and their wool is not fine enough, so they are ordinary breeds that can do nothing. Marin has begun to cultivate East Frisian sheep with excellent milk production and North Sea sheep with high-quality fine wool in his native land. However, the number of these sheep is still small and has not yet been spread in the North Sea country, let alone provided to Scotland. However, in order to improve the local sheep breeds in Scotland, Marin has ordered the Scottish herders in the Highlands to consciously select breeds with better milk or wool production and cultivate them separately. Then, Marin can use some East Frisian sheep rams and North Sea sheep rams to improve the corresponding milk-producing or wool-producing breeds. Although not as good as the original East Frisian sheep or North Sea sheep, it is at least much better than the previous breeds. As for the cattle industry, Scotland has a large number of cattle, but what makes Marin depressed is that the local cattle are short in stature and are not suitable for oxen. In this era without tractors, cattle are an important animal power for plowing. Therefore, Marin now pays more attention to large cattle such as semental cattle, which can produce meat and milk, and can also be used as oxen. Although the cattle in Scotland are good at walking on mountain roads, they are similar to the Gien horses that are also good at walking on mountain roads, they are all short in stature. Of course, this may be the choice of nature. Because if the body is too tall, the chassis is high when walking on mountain roads, and it is easy to be unstable and fall down the mountain and die. But for humans, tall and strong cattle are more useful. The dwarf cattle in the Scottish Highlands are a bit useless for people of this era. Because the short Scottish Highland cattle are not good for service and can only be used as beef cattle. Speaking of beef cattle, Marin remembered that the Angus cattle produced in Angus County and Aberdeenshire in eastern Scotland were famous beef cattle breeds in later generations. This kind of beef cattle breed has delicious meat, grows fast, and is easy to manage. It is easy to understand that the meat is delicious and grows fast, but why is it easy to manage? Because it is small and has no horns, it will not endanger the cowboy's life. Even if the cow is stubborn, it is easier for the cowboy to pull it back. Therefore, large-scale cattle ranches in later generations all like this small hornless cattle. No other, easy to manage. Why don't you raise a group of Spanish bullfights? You lose cowboys every day, who can bear it? However, Angus cattle are now useless. Because Marin's human resources are limited now, it is impossible to allocate a large amount of manpower to raise such calves that are not suitable for draft cattle. And the cost is too high for eating meat. Marin only needs to spend 8 to 10 gold coins to buy an Eastern European cow that is larger and stronger than Angus cattle from the Crimean Khanate. In Scotland, buying an Angus cow, not to mention that it can't be used as a draft cow, costs more than 20 gold coins. So, Marin is really not willing to buy Angus cattle now. There is no other reason, the cost is high. As for whether Angus beef is delicious, Marin is not a person who pays special attention to the pursuit of enjoyment, he only looks at practicality. However, considering the future prospects of Angus cattle, Marin still let Highland County introduce a small number of hundreds of Angus cattle, mainly for the cultivation and improvement of beef cattle breeds. After all, when tractors began to replace cattle and horses to plow the land one day, the role of cattle was left to be killed for meat. At that time, the advantages of Angus beef's good quality and easy management were highlighted. Therefore, Marin is making plans for the future. However, the reproduction rate of cattle is too slow, which makes Marin anxious. Just like the famous Dutch black and white dairy cows, Marin has cultivated them for many years, and now there are only more than 10,000 of them. The main reason is that the fertility rate of cattle is too low. But the Taihu pigs that Marin brought back from Daming are too fierce. 2 years ago, when Marin came back, he only brought back 495 Taihu pigs. However, 2 years later, the number of Taihu pigs has exceeded 10,000, and the number has increased 20 times. If they continue to breed, in a few years, there will be hundreds of thousands of Taihu pigs. Damn, if cattle and sheep can give birth like Taihu pigs. Because Taihu pigs are too fertile, Marin has allowed some Taihu pig boars to be castrated and raised as meat pigs. As for sows, they are still all left for breeding. Although pigs and sheep are similar, they both give birth to 1 or 2 litters a year. However, sheep only give birth to 1 or 2 lambs each time, while Taihu pigs give birth to more than a dozen in their lifetime. There is no comparison at all. At this time, Marin can also understand why there are so many wild boars in the United States in the future. As long as a few are lost, they may breed hundreds of them in a few years, and they can't be killed. Marin is sure that if he dares to release a batch of Taihu pigs on the North American continent, a classic case of species invasion will be written into history books in a few years. Moreover, this is more terrible than Australian rabbits. Australian rabbits are still afraid of people. Once pigs go wild, they can directly threaten human safety. In the end, Marin realized the danger of Taihu pigs. So he ordered that all farmers who raise Taihu pigs must ensure that Taihu pigs are in the pig pen and are not allowed to get lost. Otherwise, with the vast land and sparse population in this era, they will also taste the pain of the rampant wild boars in the United States in the future. The biggest problem with the rampant wild boars in the United States is that wild boars eat crops and vegetables, affecting farmers' income. And now Europeans raise pigs in a free-range manner. Fortunately, local European pigs only give birth to a few children per litter, and they grow slowly. If they were as fertile as Taihu pigs and grew fast. So, in order to avoid major incidents, Marin made a strict rule: anyone who dares to raise Taihu pigs will be imprisoned. However, this incident reminded Marin that when improving livestock breeds, the 2 hard indicators of fertility rate and growth rate must not be forgotten. These days, people's demand for quality is not that strong. And quantity is the core issue. So, from this moment on, Marin no longer pursues the improvement of a single quality, but takes both into account and reproductive capacity, so as to achieve scale as soon as possible. As for cattle, Marin also plans to give up purebred breeding. For example, if a single breed of black and white dairy cows is bred like this, who knows when it can be fully rolled out. Therefore, Marin plans to collect cows of breeds with good milk production performance from all over Europe and breed them with bulls of Dutch black and white dairy cows. Even if calves with milk production ability like black and white dairy cows cannot be bred, as long as they are better than ordinary breeds, it is enough. Moreover, this speed is much faster than that of single variety breeding. In other words, from this moment on, Marin changed his approach of purely pursuing quality and began to adopt the livestock industry development strategy of quantity first, quality second. Chapter 1592, Fighting for the Noble Heritage. In fact, it is not just animal husbandry that Marin wants to change to the quantity first route. Even for population, Marin plans to adopt a quantity first policy. In the past, Marin paid great attention to Germanization and hoped that the nation would be relatively pure and single. Even if England was annexed, it was mainly Germanic. However, in this way, the population growth rate is too slow. Marin spent more than 10 years introducing population for the North Sea Kingdom, but only allowed the population of the North Sea Kingdom to exceed 2 million. Perhaps, this can indeed be ranked in the forefront in the German region with a total population of only 12 million. However, Marin knew that this population was not enough to develop the local area, let alone the development of the huge America. Let alone 2 million people, even 20 million people, thrown into the American continent, can't make waves. In the later generations, the population of the United States is more than 300 million, but the land there still seems very empty. Why? The land is good. Although the land area of the United States is smaller than that of China, the land area that can be used is large. The vast plains and numerous rivers in the eastern part of China are very suitable for agriculture. Only the Rocky Mountains in the west are difficult to develop and utilize due to the terrain. Moreover, there are few deserts in the United States. Only the southwest near Mexico has a small amount of desert. And what about China? Only the eastern coastal areas are suitable for development. As for the vast western area, the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau accounts for more than a quarter. Then, the northwest is mostly deserts and Gobi deserts. Although the area is larger than that of the United States, the cultivated land area is much less than that of the United States, even less than that of India. Moreover, the Americans disdain to reclaim those barren lands and only cultivate on fertile land. In China, many cultivated lands are obviously barren areas, but they are also forcibly reclaimed into farmland. So, let alone the entire America, even the corners of the United States in later generations, Marin couldn't reclaim them. Even the 13 colonies on the east coast that were reclaimed by Britain back then, Marin didn't have enough manpower to reclaim. You know, when the United States became independent, the total population of the 13 states was 3 million. Therefore, the North Sea Kingdom still has a long way to go in terms of population growth. How to break the deadlock quickly? Increase women. Whether it is to increase livestock or population growth, the key to breaking the deadlock is women. More women means more births. If there are no women, no matter how many men there are, it is useless. Because men cannot get pregnant and give birth to children. Therefore, the best way is to introduce women from abroad. For example, Mao Mei or something. This is easy to get. As long as you give enough Rai Ergotu, the Crimeans will definitely be happy to help to rob Mao Mei from Mauzi. And then, Indian women. There are not many Indians in the jungles of North America, and they are not easy to mess with. Because they are good at hiding in the jungle. But the population of the Aztec Empire in Mexico is more than 10 million. As long as 1 or 2 million women are robbed from Mexico and give birth to children with the men of the North Sea Kingdom, the population can be rapidly expanded. However, it seems that the Aztecs in Mexico are particularly afraid of smallpox and other infectious diseases in the Old World. Therefore, before plundering Aztec women, Marin must prepare enough cattle. Then, deliberately let the cattle be infected with smallpox, make cowpox, and inoculate the Indian women. Otherwise, once those women get smallpox, the mortality rate is very high. So, cowpox and the like must be studied secretly. However, it cannot be released all at once. After all, Marin is still thinking about using smallpox to fight a biological war. For example, send people to spread smallpox in Paris. Or, at the next imperial meeting, spread smallpox directly among the princes and kill all the princes. This idea is too crazy, but Marin still held back. Because if the princes in the imperial parliament are really wiped out at once, the real beneficiary is not Marin, but France. Because Marin does not have the ability to annex Germany at once. And France, as long as it is willing to fully mobilize, can swallow up a lot of German territory. Even Poland can come to Germany to bite off a large piece of meat. And Marin, at most, will annex northern Germany at that time. Then, other regions will be cheap to powerful enemies such as France and Poland. Even the south may be cheap to Turkey. By then, the situation will be very bad. In order not to make wedding clothes for others, Marin can only suppress this crazy idea. However, before attacking the Aztec Empire and abducting Aztec women, the problem of cowpox must be solved. Not only technical problems need to be solved, but also the problem of quantity. After all, every Aztec woman must be vaccinated with cowpox, otherwise she is likely to die of smallpox. Marin was thinking about it in the office, making various plans for the future. At the same time, in the Duchy of Württemberg in southern Germany, Duke Ulrich and his nobles were almost fighting for the inheritance left by the nobles who died. In the past few months, under the guidance of Knight Chapman, who had served as an intelligence officer for Duke Ulrich of Württemberg, the poor Conrad peasant uprising army broke through more than 500 large and small manors in the Duchy of Württemberg. Among them, there are more than 200 noble manors alone, a total of hundreds. Some nobles have more than one manor. Moreover, under the instigation of Wolf, Chapman and others, the poor Conrad rebels led by Caspar adopted the horrific means of wiping out all the nobles and their families. This resulted in hundreds of noble families in the Duchy of Württemberg becoming extinct at once, and there were no living people. Then, the more than 200 noble estates left behind after they were killed became popular, attracting the crazy competition of the living nobles. Not only did Duke Ulrich, who had planned it in advance, take the lead, but other nobles were also unwilling to lag behind. After all, this was a rare opportunity to expand their strength. Of course, Duke Ulrich's position was different from that of those nobles. Duke Ulrich's position was that since those noble families had all died out, it would be better to take back their titles and fiefs. The so-called taking back naturally belonged to Duke Ulrich. Now the nobles of the Duchy of Württemberg were not happy. You took all the benefits alone, and we were left to starve. Therefore, the living nobles of the Duchy of Württemberg also joined the competition. What names did these nobles use? Blood relatives. European nobles like to marry each other. Moreover, noble families of equal status frequently marry each other. Many of the small and medium noble families that were killed had marriage relations with many families of equal status in the Duchy of Württemberg. Some of the killed nobles even had marriage relations with noble families outside the Duchy of Württemberg. According to the rules, after a family is extinct, the noble families of the side branches or marriages should inherit the title and fiefdom. The general rule is that if the extinct family has a daughter who is married, the daughter's son can inherit the title and fiefdom of the grandfather's family, Salic inheritance law. If there are no daughters, then the brothers will inherit according to the ranking. If the brothers die, the children of the eldest brother will inherit. Of course, in some countries, the Salic inheritance law is more strict, and the order of inheritance of brothers and nephews will be higher than that of daughters and sons-in-law. For example, in the Kingdom of France, after the death of King Charles IV, according to the degree of kinship, the nephew King Edward III of England should succeed to the throne. But the French chose Charles IV's nephew Philip VI to inherit the throne, which triggered the 100 Years' War between England and France. Therefore, although the right of succession seems to have rules, it can actually be manipulated. The main thing is to make different choices on whether grandsons or nephews should be given priority. But this time, Duke Ulrich's goal was to annex the property of those dead nobles, so he did not want the relatives of those nobles to inherit the estate. To this end, he announced that foreign relatives of deceased nobles could not inherit the titles and properties of deceased nobles. As for domestic relatives, the branches that have already separated are not allowed to inherit titles and properties. Only brothers and nephews who have not separated are allowed to inherit. But the problem is that if they have not separated and are still staying in the noble manor, they will most likely be killed. Even if Caspar does not kill them, Wolf and Chapman will quietly kill them to avoid leaving behind troubles. Therefore, Duke Ulrich's actions are actually a clear intention to annex the manors of the deceased nobles and take back those titles. However, the living nobles of the Duchy of Württemberg are not vegetarians either. It is difficult for them to fight against Duke Ulrich alone, but when they unite, Duke Ulrich will also give in. Then, Duke Ulrich and the united Württemberg nobles launched a fierce battle to compete for the noble inheritance. Chapter 1593, Marin's Advice. This era is the era of the nobility after all. When the nobles unite, even if Duke Ulrich of Württemberg is the monarch, it is difficult to resist. Coincidentally, at this time, Marin came to Württemberg with a large group of people and a lot of food, ready to receive the population. In the previous suppression of the rebellion, the Duchy of Württemberg captured a total of 27,000 intact peasants, plus more than 3,000 wounded. Later, thousands of middle and high-level rebels were hanged in public. In addition, Chapman and 4 others took away another 500 people. In addition, only half of the more than 3,000 wounded survived, but only a little more than 1,000 people were still in good health. In other words, Duke Ulrich now has only 26,500 healthy peasant army prisoners of war. In fact, if there were no 5,000 North Sea soldiers in the army that suppressed this time, most of the 3,000 wounded would probably have died. After all, there were no military doctors or emergency treatment in the army at that time. It took 5,000 soldiers from the North Sea Kingdom and 3 medical teams to help save half of the peasant army's wounded. But nearly 500 of them were seriously injured and could not recover. They could only save their lives but could not recover. Among them, the most classic injury was the gunshot wound caused by lead bullets. This kind of injury has a large range and is lead poisoning, which is very difficult to treat. Many unlucky people who were shot in the limbs had no choice but to choose amputation. And these lead bullets were basically caused by 1,500 musketeers among the 5,000 troops of the North Sea Kingdom. Therefore, of the 1,500 wounded who recovered, only a little over 1,000 people could fully recover, and many of those who could not fully recover were missing arms and legs. Although Duke Ulrich was arguing with the domestic noble groups and fighting for the inheritance of the dead nobles, the treatment of the prisoners of war did not stop. Because Duke Ulrich arranged these things for those low-level officers who were not nobles to deal with. Although these people were also children or descendants of nobles, they no longer had noble status. The struggle for interests among the upper classes had nothing to do with them. So, they could do their work with peace of mind. Anyway, they would have leftovers to share afterwards. Marin's fleet first arrived at Karlsruhe, an important inland port on the Rhine River in the north of the county of Baden, west of the Principality of Württemberg, and then landed there. Marin left part of the army to guard the food and supplies on the ship, and he took part of the cavalry from Karlsruhe to Stuttgart, the capital of Württemberg. At this time, Karlsruhe was not the capital of Baden, and the capital of the county of Baden was Baden-Baden. Moreover, Karlsruhe did not even have a city. This city was not built until the 18th century. Later, because of its superior transportation conditions, it replaced Baden-Baden as the capital of Baden. But as a traverser, Marin naturally knew the importance of Karlsruhe. This is the edge of the famous Black Forest in southern Germany, and from here, crossing a Black Forest to the east, you can reach the Principality of Württemberg. Therefore, although the Baden people had not yet discovered the superior conditions here, Marin still chose to dock the fleet here and built several temporary long bridge docks here to facilitate transportation. The Baden state had objections, but Marin sent a bag of gold coins to Christopher I, who was short of money at the time, and then the Baden side ignored Marin. Anyway, Karlsruhe at this time was just a remote place. Marin built infrastructure there to receive the population of the Duchy of Württemberg, and they did not lose. Not only can they receive benefits, but they can also use it as a trading point in the future. However, unlike Karlsruhe in later generations, which is closer to the Black Forest, Karlsruhe made by Marin is completely a dock on the Rhine River for convenient transportation. Later, Marin took some cavalry from Karlsruhe into the Black Forest, crossed the forest, and went to Stuttgart. When passing through the Black Forest, Marin was full of emotion. Because the Black Forest was where he secretly hunted and made a fortune. At that time, he took Kahn and Kohler and poached all the way in the Black Forest, shooting and changing places, making it difficult for those lords who wanted to drive him away and confiscate the prey to catch up with him. It was the poaching experience in the Black Forest that allowed Marin, who had nothing, to obtain a few hundred marks of startup capital. Later, with this money, he recruited a group of mercenaries and started the road to becoming the king of mercenaries. If it weren't for the experience of poaching in the Black Forest, it would be difficult for Marin to stand out quickly and become a general. Maybe, he is still under the command of some prince at this moment, and at most he is just a middle-level officer. In the blink of an eye, 20 years have passed. At that time, Marin was only 16 years old. Now, he is 36. Halfway through, Marin, old man, talks about youthful madness, and bought a bow from the hunter's house at a high price, intending to review the fun of hunting in those years. The head of the bodyguards who accompanied him, Kahn, also acted like a fool. He dismounted and walked to drive the prey to the place where Marin was ambushing. But the final result made Marin very depressed. There was a large group of red deer, but Marin only shot 2. This was also very helpless. Marin had not touched a bow and arrow for almost 20 years. Since he became the head of the mercenaries, he had never used a bow and arrow to hunt again, and his shooting skills had dropped several levels. Moreover, the hunting bows used by hunters were of poor quality, and Marin was not used to them. But anyway, this imperfect hunt made both Marin and Kahn very happy. When they arrived in Stuttgart, Duke Ulrich had been forced into a frown by the alliance of the nobles. Originally, he wanted to swallow most of it and leave only some soup for the nobles. But in the end, the nobles were so powerful that they planned to leave only a small part for him. Seeing Marin, Duke Ulrich almost cried, "Grand Duke Marin, everyone says you are cunning. No, you are resourceful, please help me think of a solution." Marin's head was full of black lines. "You are cunning, your whole family is cunning." But he still suppressed his anger and helped Duke Ulrich think of a solution. After thinking for a while, Marin suggested, "How about this, you first tell me how many of the hundreds of nobles who were killed are barons, how many are other titles, and how many are knights." After listening to Duke Ulrich's explanation, Marin was shocked and said, "Lord Ulrich, among these hundreds of nobles, only 13 are barons." Seeing Duke Ulrich nodded, Marin was speechless. "In that case, what else is there to say? There are no hereditary knights in your country, right? Then take those 87 knight manors back to the principality first. Knights are not hereditary titles, you can take back those manors without asking." Duke Ulrich hesitated and said, "But, in general, if the next generation of the fief knights can pass the knight assessment, they can also inherit the knight's fiefdom. This is the rule in continental Europe. As long as the next generation of knights can pass the knight assessment, the general manor can be inherited. However, this is not protected by law. Because, in general, the knight title in Europe is not automatically hereditary, and it needs to be confirmed by the lord." Marin rolled his eyes and said, "That's just a convention, but now those knights' children are dead, and they can still inherit it. You can tell those nobles directly, there is no legal saying that the knight title can be inherited by relatives other than sons. So, take back those 87 knight manors first." Duke Ulrich slapped his head immediately. He was confused by the nobles' quarrels before. The baronial title is protected by inheritance law, but the knightly title has no inheritance law to rely on. He has the final say. He even quarreled with the nobles over those knightly manors. How stupid. Afterwards, Marin helped him analyze the baron's inheritance problem. Marin discovered a problem, that is, the 13 barons who were killed actually had more than 130 manors under their names, with an average of more than 10 manors per baron, and the knights' manors were basically 1 per family. In other words, the real big head of these more than 200 noble manors is still the baron's manor. At present, the nobles who are jumping the most are actually only more than 30 existing barons. As for the other hundreds of knights, they are basically their supporters. Marin thought about it and directly asked Duke Ulrich to send all the hundreds of knights to perform tasks in the name of suppressing bandits. Those knights are nominally the thugs of the duchy. At this time, the rebels led by Chapman have revived, and it is only natural to send them to chase and suppress them. If they dare to disobey, Duke Ulrich can directly depose their knighthood. Only the more than 30 barons are a little more difficult to deal with. Because the barons cannot be easily deposed unless most of the nobles agree. Chapter 1594 Four Winds. The next day, Duke Ulrich of Württemberg followed the plan and dispatched more than 100 knights who acted as cheerleaders for the nobles, leaving the nobles confused. However, the nobles could not object. Because at this moment, the peasant uprising army rebuilt by Chapman and others continued to wreak havoc in the Duchy of Württemberg. Anyone who dared to oppose these dispatches would be accused of colluding with the rebels. Then, more than half of the hundreds of nobles who had originally forced the palace were gone in an instant, and their momentum also dropped sharply. Originally, although the more than 100 knights had no decision-making power, they would make a fuss. Those knights had loud voices and made a lot of noise at the meeting, which gave Duke Ulrich a headache. After the knights left, the venue immediately became much quieter. The remaining more than 30 barons were all people of status, and it was impossible for them to shout like the knights. Then, the negotiations became much gentler, no longer as noisy as a vegetable market. But at the same time, the nobles' momentum could not rise. Just like a gangster, without a group of thugs wearing sunglasses around him, there is no pressure. At the same time, at the suggestion of Marin, Duke Ulrich stuffed more than a dozen civil and military officials in the Principality of Württemberg who he personally promoted into the negotiation venue. Although these dozen people did not have fiefs, most of them were the second sons of large noble families, and they were also considered noble children. Moreover, after this peasant uprising, Duke Ulrich also planned to promote a group of his own people. For this negotiation, he just brought these people here to help him speak and build momentum. Before bringing them here, Duke Ulrich directly promised that whoever could help him win the argument against those nobles could get the title of nobility. Anyway, hundreds of nobles died, and many titles were vacant. In this way, these dozen noble children without titles were suddenly excited. This is what they dreamed of. Then, the negotiation venue became the stage for these dozen people to quarrel. Although there were more than 30 barons on the opposite side, they were completely at a disadvantage in front of them who were full of fighting spirit. In the following days, Duke Ulrich entered the mode of watching the show, watching the dozen loyal subordinates quarreling with those barons. Those barons felt aggrieved. They were obviously of higher status, but the dozen opponents on the opposite side were not easy to deal with. Although they did not have titles, they were also from noble families and held official positions. In addition, they were Duke Ulrich's men, so it was not easy for them to use their status to pressure others. Moreover, these dozen guys kept saying, loyal to the emperor and patriotic, which clearly implied that they were disloyal. Moreover, these dozen people were all outstanding civil servants in Ulrich's court, and they were all good at speaking. After being inspired by the title, his voice became louder and he was invincible when he quarreled. At the same time, at the suggestion of Marin, Duke Ulrich secretly sent Wolf to inform Chapman and others to deliberately lead the rebels to attack the fiefs of those barons. When they learned that their fiefs were looted by the rebels, these barons could not sit still, became anxious, and fell into a disadvantage in the quarrel. In addition, Duke Ulrich secretly won over some barons who had a good relationship with him and divided the noble camp. After many days of competition, the noble alliance finally fell into a disadvantage. At the same time, nearly half of the barons were won over by Duke Ulrich. But as a price, Duke Ulrich had to take out half of the estates of the dead barons to distribute to those barons who turned to him. The final result was that more than 130 baron manors were divided into 68, and Duke Ulrich only got 65. As for the other half of the barons who were not won over, Duke Ulrich did not dare to let them go back empty-handed. It just so happened that in addition to the more than 200 noble estates, there were another 300 junker landlord estates. So Duke Ulrich took out 70 of them and let them divide them up. However, in this era, the best farms must belong to the great nobles, the junker landlords' estates are second, and the common people's land is the worst. Therefore, the junker estates that the nobles who were not won over by him got, the area and fertility of the land must be not as good as those of the formal baronial estates and knights' estates. However, it is better to have it than not to have it. But this is just the beginning, because Duke Ulrich sought to seize those estates not for farming, but for selling them for money. Later, Duke Ulrich auctioned off all the 230 junker landlord estates that he had confiscated, and sold them for 250,000 golden gold coins. As for the 152 noble estates, because the land was fertile and close to the river, Duke Ulrich did not plan to sell them for the time being, but planned to send people to plant them himself. At this point, Duke Ulrich and the nobles were all happy. After all, although the 230 manors cost them a lot of money, they were definitely not at a loss to get the land in this era dominated by agriculture. If Duke Ulrich's camp had not sold the 230 manors to them, they would never have allowed Duke Ulrich to embezzle so many manors. As for the knights who were sent out to suppress bandits, who cares about their interests? Of course, if they have military merits in suppressing the rebels, they will still be rewarded. This is the rule. Anyway, the rebels led by Chapman and others will slaughter many manors later, and they will just take out some to reward the meritorious soldiers. Moreover, Duke Ulrich and the barons agreed that the ownerless manors that will be received next will be distributed to those barons. However, the auction system was adopted for the distribution. In other words, Duke Ulrich did not want those manors, but if he wanted those manors, he had to take them through auction. The money from the auction all went to Duke Ulrich. In this way, the cash-strapped Duke Ulrich got the money to pay off his debts, and the barons got the land, which they could pass down to future generations. It was definitely a win-win situation. Of course, this was not just a win-win situation, but a win-win situation for all three parties. Because the barons didn't have much money now. So, they needed to borrow money to buy land. In this way, another winner emerged, that is, the banking family Fugger family. Duke Ulrich and the barons had jointly issued an invitation, inviting the Fugger family to participate in the land division and provide loans for the barons to buy land. According to the annual interest rate of loans in this era, which is at least 10%, and generally more than 15%, the Fugger family can also eat their fill this time. In fact, after this loot-sharing meeting, the barons of the Duchy of Württemberg suddenly discovered that the existence of those mud-legged rebels seemed to be a good thing. The land left by the nobles and junker landlords who were harmed became their possessions, and they made a lot of money. So, next, the barons of the Duchy of Württemberg were not so concerned about suppressing the peasant uprising. Even deliberately delayed. Because the more manors those mud-legged rebels harmed, the more benefits they would get later. However, the premise is that they have to guard their own manors to avoid being harmed by the rebels and becoming victims. In fact, there is another hidden big winner in this peasant uprising in the Duchy of Württemberg, that is Marin. Because the captives of the suppressed peasant uprising army will mostly be sold to Marin to enrich the population of the American colonies. Compared with the mountainous Duchy of Württemberg, there are too many fertile lands along the rivers in America. The manors that the Württemberg barons fought so hard to grab are just scum in Marin's eyes. Now, what Marin lacks most is population. As long as there are people, much more fertile arable land can be cultivated than the entire Duchy of Württemberg. Marin was too lazy to take a second look at the small manors that the Württemberg nobles fought so hard to grab. Therefore, he is also the big winner of the Württemberg peasant uprising. However, he is a hidden big winner. Therefore, this feast of division is not a win-win-win situation for 3 parties, but a win-win-win situation for 4 parties. The only losers are probably the owners of the manors who died in the disaster. Chapter 1595, Immigration Development Plan. Jacob Fugger couldn't suppress the smile on his face these days. Why? Because it's so easy to make money recently. As bankers, the Fugger family likes high-quality customers to come to them for loans. Just like the 5 major banks in China in the future, seeing rich people like Jack Ma and Lao Wang come to them for loans. Insurance, the profit is also sufficient. Moreover, the interest rate of loans these days is much higher than in the future. The annual interest rate of those nobles and the Fugger family starts at 15%. This is for nobles with better repayment ability. Those with more debts need to increase the interest rate to borrow money. For example, 20% or even more. Sometimes, when there is a war, the annual interest rate can even soar to 40%. What? You say those nobles may not be able to pay it back? Impossible. Why? This time, those nobles used the land they bought as collateral to deal with those manors. In any case, the land will not depreciate. If it really doesn't work, the worst-case scenario is to confiscate those manors that were bought as collateral. In short, loans with land as collateral are still safer loans. In addition, Marin, the introducer of this business, is also a very high-quality customer in the eyes of Jacob Fugger, no less than Ma Dad and Lao Wang in the eyes of the 5 major banks in later generations. Because Marin has hard currency collateral in his hands, grain and spirits. Marin and Duke Ulrich bought population, and there was a gap of hundreds of thousands of gold coins. All this money needs to be borrowed from the Fugger family, and the annual interest rate is 15%. And Marin also has collateral, which can be grain or spirits brewed from grain. They are all mortgaged at 80% of the market price, which is the purchase price. Of course, only when Marin can't pay back the money will he mortgage grain or spirits. According to the intelligence of the Fugger family, the value of grain and spirits in Marin's hands far exceeds the mortgage value. Therefore, there is no need to worry that Marin can't pay back the loan. In this way, this business is lying and making money. Therefore, before Marin developed America into a prosperous country, the most profitable one on the surface was probably the Fugger family. Secondly, it was Duke Ulrich of Württemberg who took a lot of cash. However, if we look at it from a long-term perspective, Marin, the person who made the most money, is not considered. In fact, the nobles who divided up most of the manors made the most money. Because arable land will always maintain its value, especially in the southern German region with few plains. Of course, this long-term will take hundreds of years. The value of these lands can only be reflected when the future generations start to speculate on land. If it is purely farming, the profit is far less than that of the Fugger family, which runs a bank. But in hundreds of years, who can tell whether the descendants of these nobles can keep the land of their ancestors? If we consider it from a risk perspective, the most unreliable Duke Ulrich of Württemberg has become the biggest winner. Because he has already pocketed it. But unfortunately, most of this guy's money has to be used to pay off debts, not to invest money to make money. Moreover, with this guy's extravagant style, even if there are still hundreds of thousands more after paying off the debts, most of them will be spent by him. Otherwise, with the income of hundreds of thousands of golden gold coins that he can cash out, it is enough to buy several counties. However, Marin likes prodigals like Duke Ulrich the most. Because, if this guy didn't owe a huge debt of millions of gold coins, how could he be forced to sell people? And Marin is most short of people. For this prodigal duke who dares to sell people, he is so happy that he wants to kiss him a few times. Moreover, Marin wants to use Duke Ulrich as a benchmark and set an example for others. You know, in the German region, there is more than one duchy of Württemberg with a large population. In the entire southern German region, most of the principalities have too many people. The main reason is that there are too few plains here. After hundreds of years of stable life, there is no war, and the population is constantly increasing, which makes the principalities in southern Germany have the problem of surplus population. Therefore, the famous German mercenaries mainly come from the southern German region. Because only here are there extra people to serve as soldiers and die. In addition to these peasant uprisings this year, there will be larger peasant uprisings in the next 10 years, also in southern Germany. In the German Peasant War in 1524, more than 100,000 peasants were massacred by the suppressors. Moreover, most of them were able-bodied men. If their families were included, that would be hundreds of thousands of people. If you can take the opportunity to buy it, you can completely cultivate a large area of land in North America. You know, when the 13 states of North America were independent, there were only 2 or 3 million people in the 13 states. Hundreds of thousands of people can completely cultivate 2 or 3 states. That's the state of the old United States, and each state is at least hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. 2 or 3 states are larger than the entire German region. Of course, the so-called development of 2 or 3 states is unlikely to be fully cultivated. However, the fertile land on both sides of the main rivers can still be developed. At the beginning, the pioneers of the colonists who colonized America did this. For places that are not close to rivers and are not convenient for irrigation, they are too lazy to develop them, and only develop fertile land near rivers. In Europe, fertile land near rivers is generally only in the hands of nobles. Marin is now spending a lot of money to buy people from Duke Ulrich, the prodigal son. In fact, he is doing it for others to see. At the right time after completing the transaction, Marin will deliberately leak the news to make other southern German princes jealous. Then, after a few years, when the peasant uprising broke out in 1524, they will remember that these rebellions can be exchanged for money. Then, without Marin saying anything, they will take the initiative to sell. After all, most German princes have bad finances. If they can exchange for money, they will not be willing to kill. Or, it can be said that the princes with good economic conditions will not overexploit the peasants. If the peasants are not exploited, the peasant uprising will not break out. In other words, the princes of all the principalities where the peasant uprising broke out must be very short of money. Otherwise, they would not squeeze the peasants hard and force the peasants to launch an uprising. At that time, these princes who are short of money will definitely be willing to catch the rebellious peasants and sell them for money. After all, no one wants to be a poor ghost. When Marin urged the Duchy of Württemberg to escort the 26,500 farmers and their families to Karlsruhe for loading as soon as possible, the last batch of 3,000 people from the 3,000 farmer families bought from the Breisgau area in the Emden port had already been loaded and left the port for the American continent. This time, the destination of these 13,000 immigrants is still New Jersey, east of the Delaware River, which has just been occupied. There are 20,000 square kilometers of area there. Before, it was mainly composed of tens of thousands of English refugees, and there were only a few thousand Germans. Including the New York area on the edge of New Jersey, it is also dominated by English refugees. After all, Marin is a German, and naturally does not want the English to dominate the place he values most, even if they are also Germans. Therefore, whether it is this batch of 13,000 people or the next batch of more than 100,000 Württemberg people, they must be resettled in the New York and New Jersey areas first, so that the Germans occupy a dominant position. Of course, the little liars taught by Taylor must also be equipped. Marin needs these missionaries to help fool the new immigrants and make them loyal to him. Fortunately, many of Taylor's disciples can now stand on their own, and Taylor doesn't need to teach the little fools himself. And Taylor's many disciples can work together to teach more little fool missionaries to help Marin calm people's hearts. However, New Jersey certainly doesn't need more than 100,000 people. Therefore, when more than 100,000 immigrants from the Württemberg area arrived, Marin's colonial army would cross the Delaware River and head towards the future Delaware and Pennsylvania in the west to occupy and develop these areas. In later generations, the Red Oak in Pennsylvania was very famous. The famous battleship, Constitution, was mainly built with red oak. Moreover, Pennsylvania is rich in resources. The coal resources in the Appalachian Mountains in the west are very rich. Pittsburgh, the famous steel center in the United States in later generations, is located in the western part of Pennsylvania, close to the coal mines in the Appalachian Mountains. In addition, the world's first modern oil well was drilled by oil pioneer Derrick in 1859 in Testerville, not far from Lake Erie in northwestern Pennsylvania. Marin didn't know where Testerville was exactly, but he knew that early oil wells like Testerville would definitely have oil seepage exposed on the ground before development, emitting smells similar to sulfur. Otherwise, early oil practitioners would not drill there. After all, the oil industry had not yet started at that time, and there was no theory of looking for water in synclines and looking for oil in anticlines. They could only drill because the oil seepage was exposed. And if they controlled Pennsylvania, they could go further west to find high-quality iron ore in the Great Lakes region. There is iron and coal here, and the industrial conditions here are even better than those in Germany. After all, Germany actually lacks iron ore. There are even fewer high-grade and high-quality iron ore like the ones in the Great Lakes region. Chapter 1596, Everyone has his own duty. Marin has a comprehensive plan for immigration and development in America. Before, for various reasons, Marin's American colonies only had tens of thousands of English immigrants in Cape Breton Island and New York, as well as thousands of people in Savannah, Cuba, Grenada and the Pampas. In the Panama region, due to the harsh climate, it is mainly black uncles, with only more than 1,000 white people. In total, these colonial populations, not counting black uncles, are only 60,000 to 70,000. Among them, the most important are the 50,000 English refugees. These refugees were the refugees who destroyed several counties in northern England when Scotland invaded England. Because in order to prevent someone from stealing business, Marin deliberately demonized the American continent. As a result, Marin also suffered the consequences. Not many German immigrants were willing to go to the American continent. But Marin couldn't explain it yet, because once he explained it, it would be exposed, and other countries would become interested in America. So he could only bear it. It was not until he finally caught the opportunity of the peasant uprising that he could force the immigrant population to go to America on a large scale. In the future, Marin plans to let the Germans occupy and develop core areas such as New York and Pennsylvania. The English were mainly arranged at the seaside, mainly fishing and whaling. The strengths of the English are mainly sailing and raising sheep. They are not proficient in farming. If there were no military suppression, they would not be willing to cultivate the land intensively. Therefore, when there are enough German immigrants, it is better to arrange them to fish or sail, which can be regarded as liberating their talents. As for German immigrants, most of them are landlubbers, they value land more, and like to farm steadily. In addition, German farmers are obedient. Although the talent of German farmers in farming is not much better than that of English people, and cannot be compared with Chinese farmers, Germans are more obedient and more submissive than English people. Thousands of years of serfdom have made German farmers accustomed to obeying the orders of noble masters, and they have always been more honest. Even participating in the peasant uprising was because the oppression of the noble masters was too harsh, making them unable to survive, so they had no choice but to rise up. In northern Germany, there were no peasant uprisings because there were enough fields to plant. England is different. Since the outbreak of the Taylor peasant uprising in 1381, England's serfdom has begun to disintegrate. Throughout the 15th century, most of the English serfs redeemed their freedom and became self-employed farmers. Self-employed farmers have a strong sense of self-awareness and are more difficult to manage. For example, in the New York colony, if there were no 2,000 colonial troops, Albert would have been unable to control those English immigrants. Moreover, in the past 2 years, those English immigrants have also begun to make a fuss. The main reason is that those English immigrants want to redeem their serf status and become self-employed farmers. The reason is very simple: these English immigrants were originally self-employed farmers in the country. A few years ago, because the domestic food was robbed by Scotland and they were starving to death, they accepted to go to America and become serfs of Marin. In the first few years, they were indeed very honest. After all, compared with the time when the food was robbed by the Scottish army and they were almost starving to death, it was much better to be a serf for Marin. However, after many years, they gradually forgot the kindness of being a serf to Marin, and began to want more. If it were German peasants, they might not have such an idea. Because the German serfdom has always been like this, and it is right to listen to the Lord. But the English peasants are different. They have been self-employed farmers and know the freedom of being self-employed farmers. Therefore, after being stable serfs for a few years, they began to try to ask Albert for the right to redeem their serf status and want to be self-employed farmers again. Of course, Albert did not agree to their request. After all, this mouth can't be opened casually. But Marin knew that once these people had this idea, they could no longer hold it back. People who have been masters are unwilling to be slaves forever. One day, these English people will make a fuss. So, Marin was also very straightforward. You don't want to be serfs, right? No problem. As long as the German immigrants arrive, we will give you freedom. Not only will they give you freedom, but they will also lend you money to buy boats, so that you can become boat owners and fishermen. It just so happens that the fish in the Newfoundland fishing grounds are endless, and these English people will definitely be able to catch a lot of fish. At that time, the Germans will farm while the English will fish. No, they can also recruit sailors and even sailors from the English. It can be considered that everyone is put to good use. Of course, when the English men go fishing, the women can't be idle. They can herd sheep at home, while watching the children and herding sheep. Sheeping does not require any physical strength, so women can do it. What's more, they can use sheepdogs to help. As for farming, let the honest and obedient German farmers do it. Then, the two sides will exchange supplies. The English will exchange fish catches and wool with the Germans for food and meat, and everyone will have a good life. Later, when England and the North Sea Kingdom are united, Marin's descendants can recruit army soldiers in the North Sea Kingdom and sailors in England. Everyone has their own duties and uses their own strengths. To be honest, it is really a waste to let the English become the colonial overlord. These guys' talents are fishing and pirates, but they insist on occupying land. As a result, the land occupied by the English was developed, but it was mainly cultivated by black slaves. The English gentlemen were not willing to engage in such physical labor. In later generations, the United States took off agriculture because it introduced many German and Irish immigrants, and then it was able to develop agriculture with peace of mind. Originally, the 13 colonies were mainly plantations for growing cash crops. To tell a true story, Jamestown, the first colony of Britain in North America, did not engage in agriculture at all, and food was mainly supplied by Indians. In the 17th century, Jamestown was besieged by Indians because of a quarrel with the Indians, lost its food source, and many people starved to death. Then, the British colonists in Jamestown survived by eating the corpses of their compatriots. Of course, we can't blame the British for not wanting to farm with peace of mind. Instead, they have better ways to make money. Why should they farm? The English are good at sailing, and the profits from sailing trade are very high, which is much more cost-effective than farming. Therefore, the English went to engage in maritime trade. Only the Germans and Irish are stubborn and will dig for food in the land. Of course, the English also farm. However, they usually use black slaves, or hire Germans or Irish to farm, and they are the masters. In this case, Marin thinks it is better to give the English freedom and let them play to their strengths in navigation and maritime trade. Anyway, he also needs a lot of navigation talents. And farming can rely on the Germans. Everyone has their own duties and does what they are good at. How great. Chapter 1597, Across Philadelphia. In Württemberg, 26,500 peasant army prisoners of war were quickly prepared for Marin. Including their families, the total number reached 105,000. However, among these 105,000 people, 12,000 were over 50 years old. Many peasant army prisoners of war knelt down and begged Marin not to let their elderly parents go to the savage continent to suffer. Marin thought that it was right. It was too dangerous for old men and women to cross the sea on a sailboat. The boat on the sea is completely different from that on the inland river. The boat on the inland river is stable and suitable for the elderly, women and children. For example, the ancient Chinese moved their families, and unless they had to, they generally chose to take the Grand Canal and other waterways. Because inland river boats are much more stable than carriages. Sea ships are different. On the sea, sea ships sway left and right under the strong wind, with a large amplitude. Older elderly people are afraid that it is really unbearable. Therefore, Marin finally agreed that all people over 60 years old can stay in the manor in the North Sea country for retirement. As for those between 50 and 60 years old, they are now going to Emden Port to find fishing boats to go out to sea to adapt. After they have adapted, they will be sent to North America. When Marin arrived in Karlsruhe with these 105,000 immigrants and began to load the ships to go back home along the Rhine River, the 13,000 peasant captives in the Breisgau area, the first fleet of 3,000 people, had already arrived in the New York, New Jersey colony in North America. Their landing place is the Philadelphia area in the future. However, it is not in the Philadelphia area west of the Delaware River, but in Kenton on the other side of the Delaware River from Philadelphia in the future. The reason for landing here is that there are still some Indian natives active in the west bank of the Delaware River. If you rashly land on the west bank, you will easily be attacked by those Indian natives. It is much safer to land in Kenton on the east bank of the Delaware River. After all, it is difficult for Indian natives to cross the wide Delaware River. Moreover, even if they cross it with a canoe, there will be guards guarding the Delaware River to warn them. As for the original Delaware people on the east bank of the Delaware River, they were basically all moved to Albany by Marin's instruction to Albert, using a combination of coaxing, deception and bribery. Now, the east bank of the Delaware River is full of Marin's people. When the fleet sailed from the open Delaware Bay into the Delaware River, the immigrants from Breisgau on the ship shouted in surprise, "Oh my God, what a big river! This width is much wider than the Rhine." In fact, this is because they have no experience. The Delaware River is not big, with a total length of only 650 kilometers. How can it be compared with the Rhine? However, the lower reaches of the Delaware River are very wide and look very big. Moreover, the Breisgau area where these immigrants originally lived was close to the upper reaches of the Rhine, so of course the Rhine they saw was not big. Even when they went down the Rhine to the North Sea Kingdom and reached the Lippe River, they followed the narrow Munster Canal to another small EMS river. Therefore, they had never seen the estuary of the Rhine in the Netherlands. Then, when they first saw the wide lower reaches of the Delaware River, they were naturally shocked. When the fleet arrived at the Kenton area in the future, there was already a row of long bridge docks waiting there. These long bridge docks were built by English immigrants who had moved here long ago. Although the Kenton area was not an officially designated English immigration area, Albert still recruited 3,000 English men to come to Kenton in advance and built more than a dozen long bridge docks. They also cut down all the trees along the coast, leaving behind piles of wood. Under the arrangement of the soldiers on the ship, the immigrants began to walk from the long bridge dock to the shore in an orderly manner. When they stepped on the land, some experienced old farmers couldn't help but step on the land along the coast with their feet. Excellent fertile soil by the river. Very suitable for growing wheat. As farmers, these elders are very experienced. In the past, they farmed for the nobles and junker landlords in Breisgau. Some old farmers originally lived in the noble manors near the Rhine River in the west of Breisgau. Generally speaking, the fertile land near the Rhine River is usually used by the nobles to grow the most expensive wheat. Those lands not near the river are used to grow barley. This is the custom in southern Germany. In the north, rye is grown in places not near the river. The south is warmer, and barley is generally grown in places not near the river. Therefore, in later generations of German beer, dark beer brewed from rye is popular in the north. In the south, such as Munich, because barley is grown more, beer is mainly brewed with barley. After the immigrants landed, the strongest group of men began to fetch water and mud under the guidance of the soldiers to prepare to build adobe houses. The young women mainly pulled thatch, which was said to be the bones of the adobe wall. The old people watched the children while busy cooking. Of course, some old men did not help with the cooking, but ran around to trample the soil with their feet. Sometimes, they would grab a handful of soil and put it to their noses to smell it. When they smelled a faint smell of rotten grass, they were ecstatic. What good soil! Experienced farmers know that this kind of black-gray soil with a smell of rotten grass is the most fertile. Just like the black soil in northeast China and Ukraine, it is because of the accumulation and rot of dead grass from generation to generation, and the black-gray rotten impurities have turned the soil black. This kind of soil is the most fertile. Suddenly, a very prestigious old man asked in confusion, "Since the land is so fertile, there is a big river, and the climate is okay, why is this place called the wild continent? Is there a danger here that we don't know about?" After saying this, the old men who came to check the soil became nervous. At this time, an officer following the old men laughed. "Soldier, what are you laughing at? Is there anything wrong with what the old man said?" The North Sea officer nodded and said, "Yes, it is wrong. Strictly speaking, this place is called American Continent, named after Lord Amerigo. As for wild continent, it is not wrong. Thousands of leagues south of here, 1 league on land is equal to 3 miles, which is 4.827 kilometers, there is a tropical forest called Amazon, which is indeed wild and terrifying. But we are far away from there, and it is actually a richer place than the European continent. The reason why I say that is that I am worried that other countries will come to rob." The officer named Leighton gave a detailed explanation to several old men. In fact, his mission this time was to explain to this group of immigrants. As a soldier who followed Marin very early, the 40-year-old Leighton has been promoted to company commander and is a veteran from the 2nd Legion. Because he is a Frisian and knows how to sail, Marin transferred him to be responsible for protecting the immigrant fleet. At the same time, he also took on the task of explaining the local situation to the immigrants. In this way, the first batch of 3,000 immigrants from Breisgau each performed their duties. The men mixed mud to build houses, the women helped to pull weeds to make bones and muscles, the elderly, mainly old ladies, cooked and took care of the children. And several of the most prestigious old farmers sat by the river on the other side of Philadelphia, quietly listening to the North Sea officer Leighton explain the local geographical environment and Marin's plans for the future. Chapter 1598, The County of Philadelphia and The Night Walk in Brocade Clothes. It is July now, the hottest time in the northern hemisphere. The highest temperature here in summer has reached 34 degrees. Fortunately, this group of immigrants came from Breisgau in southern Germany, where it is not uncommon for the temperature to exceed 30 degrees in summer. If it were someone from the coastal areas of northern Germany, they might not be able to stand this high temperature. The summer here is a little hotter than in Germany, but not too hot. The southern region is hotter, but we are in the north, and the summer is not very hot. In winter, it can sometimes be very cold. At least, it is much colder than in Germany. But it doesn't matter. Our Grand Duke invented the Kong. If it is too cold in winter, we can burn the Kong at night and the house will be warm. Leighton explained to several old men with a smile. What should we do when we go out? If it is too cold, we don't have thick leather clothes to go out. At this time, an old man interrupted. In his understanding, when going out in winter, people usually wear fur coats like nobles. Leighton looked at him speechlessly and said, "Where can we get so many fur clothes for you to wear? Although the local fur is indeed abundant, it is too luxurious for a farmer like you to wear fur." The old farmer said embarrassedly, "I know that too, but do we not go out in winter?" Leighton shook his head and said, "No, our Grand Duke has already thought about it, wear a straw raincoat." Then, he sent a soldier to take a straw raincoat out of the cabin. At the same time, he called a soldier who could weave a straw raincoat. This is a straw raincoat, made of straw. When it rains, you can wear it to keep out the rain. When it's cold in winter, you can wear it outside to keep out the cold. Isn't this grass? Can it be worn as clothes? Will there be lice? An old farmer asked hesitantly. After hearing this, Leighton rolled his eyes. "You threw it around, threw it into a haystack, and then wore it, so it's easy to get lice. If you keep it well and keep it clean. Wash it with water before wearing it, and then dry it in the sun or in the air, it won't get lice. If you get lice, it must be because you don't take a bath normally." Leighton suddenly remembered that before boarding the ship at Breisgau, when he forced these guys to take a bath, they cried and screamed. At that time, many people refused to take a bath, thinking that they would get sick after taking a bath. But the North Sea Kingdom has strict regulations, and no one is allowed to board the ship without taking a bath. In desperation, the soldiers guarding them had to violently force them to take off their clothes and take a bath. When taking a bath, their clothes were boiled in lime water, which is said to be disinfected. Forcing men to take a bath is better, forcing women to take a bath. Leighton feels excited just thinking about it. At that time, he took a group of men and forcibly stripped a group of village women who refused to take a bath. Then, all kinds of little white sheep were shaking in front of me. Many soldiers couldn't help but touch and pinch them, causing the village women to shout. Fortunately, the military regulations of the North Sea Kingdom were strict, and soldiers were strictly prohibited from doing anything to women. Otherwise, they would have to do it on the spot. Also, fortunately, this is not China during the Ming and Qing dynasties, and women don't commit suicide after being touched. Otherwise, people would have to die. However, the situation of forcibly stripping a group of girls and sisters-in-law and throwing them into the temporary bathing pool at that time is so exciting when I think about it now. Later, before boarding the ship at the North Sea port of Emden, another centralized bathing was organized. This time, no one was forced to enforce it. Everyone took off their clothes and took a bath obediently. Especially the women, they no longer wanted to take a bath under the watch of the big-headed soldiers, but went to a more secluded place. After the explanation, Leighton went to inspect the progress of the house construction. The old men who listened to his explanation returned to the crowd and explained to others. This is the case in the countryside. Although the old men in ancient Europe did not have the right to speak like the elders in ancient Chinese villages, they were still listened to because of their rich experience. Therefore, Leighton simply explained to the old men first, and then asked them to explain to the immigrants. This is much more useful than saying it yourself. Because many young people will have resistance to Leighton and his friends. However, the young immigrants still respect the elders among them. For the rural people, without the guidance of agricultural technicians, these experienced old farmers are the life mentors of the young farmers. When building the houses where the immigrants live, Leighton also divided some able-bodied men and some soldiers to start building a simple military fortress by the river. Because Leighton will become the military commander here in the future. After all, there are Indian activities on the west bank of the Delaware River. For the safety of local immigrants, a troop must be left to monitor the movements of the Indians on the other side of the river. In addition, these immigrants did not come voluntarily. In order to prevent them from making trouble, an army needs to be left to monitor and suppress them. Only when Marin sent Taylor's disciples to deceive them, could he relax his supervision. Also, in the near future, the North Sea Congress will use Kenton as a bridgehead to launch an attack on the Philadelphia area on the other side and seize the land there. According to the previous canonization, Marin's younger brother Albert is the Earl of Philadelphia. His fiefdom is in the Philadelphia area on the west bank of the Delaware River. Now, Simon has been enfeoffed, and Albert's fiefdom has not yet been fulfilled. This time, Marin chose to establish a colony in Kenton on the other side of Philadelphia to prepare for expansion to the other side. Once the colonial development here goes smoothly, when the farming season is slack, it will be an opportunity to organize the army to cross the Delaware River and capture the Philadelphia area. Once the Philadelphia area is captured, Marin will establish Philadelphia on the other side of the river and confirm the establishment of the country of Philadelphia. By then, Marin intends to assign the entire Delmarva Peninsula, where the future Delaware is located, including the Philadelphia area, to the county of Philadelphia. Although this piece of land is very fertile, close to the outlet of the river, and there is a good place like Philadelphia, Marin doesn't care much. After all, North America is so big, this piece of land is really nothing. If you count carefully, the area of this piece of land is less than 20,000 square kilometers. Compared with Simon's Ukrainian area, it is much smaller. But Marin can't give him too much land. It's not that he is reluctant to give up the land, but the population. Simon occupies the northern part of the Ukrainian steppe. Although the land area is large, he has 3 million Ukrainians as a base, so he can toss as much as he wants. But Albert is different. There is land here, and there must be enough population to develop it. If too much land is given, Albert will inevitably look for people to develop it everywhere. If Marin asks for people, Marin can't really not give it. So, just give less land, so that you don't have to worry about Albert asking for too many people. Besides, the land given to Albert is also a better land in North America, and it is not unfair to him. If this side is developed, it will be much richer than those small states in the German region. Of course, there is also the problem of not being well known here. After all, before the North Sea Kingdom has the power to say no, the establishment of the Philadelphia County must be carried out quietly and cannot be publicized everywhere. Therefore, although Albert is very affordable, it is inevitable that he will have to walk at night in gorgeous clothes for a long time. Because, even if he swallows such a huge benefit and is richer than those earls in Germany, he cannot share it with others for the time being, nor can he brag to others, and can only keep it in his heart. This feeling is not very good. Chapter 1599, Compulsory Military Service in the Colonies. Regarding walking at night in brocade clothes, there are actually two very interesting comparisons in ancient Chinese history. Xiang Yu, the overlord of Western Chu, could not stand walking at night in brocade clothes, and was eager to return home to show off to his fellow villagers, so he moved the capital from Xianyang back to Pengcheng near his hometown. Then, he lost the world. In contrast, Liu Bang, after conquering the world, was still able to hold back and not return home to show off. Even when his father Liu Taigong missed his hometown, he did not send him back home, but simply moved all the old friends of Liu Taigong in his hometown to Guangzhou and rebuilt a town exactly the same as his hometown Fengyi. Later, this place became the famous Xinfeng County. So, if you want to succeed, don't rush to pretend. Otherwise, it's easy to get unlucky. Another negative example is Zhu Yuanzhang, the first emperor of the Ming dynasty. At the end of the Yuan dynasty, there were more than just his family who rebelled. At that time, Han Shantong, Lu Futong, Zhang Shicheng, Fang Guizhen and Su Shouhui, the original boss of Qin Yuliang, who was killed and usurped by Qin Yuliang, were all very powerful. But Zhu Yuanzhang was smart. He accepted Zhu Sheng's advice of building high walls, storing grain, and claiming the throne slowly. He did not stand out, but slowly accumulated strength, and finally swept across several other families. In fact, the deep digging holes, storing grain, and not seeking hegemony of the later generations of Taizu was also learned from this. At that time, the Soviet Union loved to pretend, and was criticized by the Americans with a group of younger brothers. As a result, the low-key China at that time could survive in the cracks. Otherwise, no matter which of NATO or the Warsaw Pact was fully against China, we could not stop it. Then, China pretended to be a grandson for another 30 years until Marin traveled through time, when it had strength. When the Americans found out, it was too late. The most pitfall is that the Americans wanted to move China, but found that their country had deindustrialized. Without China, it would be difficult for the Americans to get their daily necessities. Brother Chuan wanted the factory to return to the United States, but the boss of the factory saw the labor cost of the Americans and shrank back directly. Of course, Marin didn't know whether the Americans would fight hard to maintain their dominant position. Thanks to nuclear weapons, otherwise, there would definitely be a world-class war. After all, no one is willing to give up the leading position easily. Those peace-loving people who want to give up nuclear weapons should first look at the fate of Ukraine. So, being too high-profile is not a good thing, especially when you don't have absolute strength. Although Genie Yixing is aggrieved, it is safe and affordable. However, it is still too early to say Genie Yixing, because the Philadelphia County has not been established yet. At this moment, the first batch of immigrants are busy building houses under the command of Leighton. For this city, Marin was too lazy to use a new name and directly stole the name of Kenton. Of course, it is not Kenton City, but Kenton Town. After all, there are not many people here. Leighton landed with 200 soldiers, most of whom were musketeers, and there were also 50 sword and shield soldiers. The reason for this configuration is that the Indians mainly use bows and arrows and don't fight you in close combat at all. Therefore, sword and shield soldiers who can resist bows and arrows, and musketeers who can fight back are the most practical. Moreover, in the future, Marin will open up the supply of matchlocks to immigrants in the New World. After all, there are many dangers on this newly developed continent. It is very dangerous for immigrants, especially those in the border areas, to have no guns. But Marin will never allow civilians to own clockwork muskets or flintlocks. He will catch them if he sees one. Because clockwork muskets and flintlocks have great potential to be converted into pistols, which are very convenient for assassination. And matchlocks can be used to deal with natives and beasts, but it is unlikely to be used for riots and assassinations. Therefore, they will be allowed to be promoted. Moreover, the promotion of matchlocks is very conducive to training the people of the colonies into qualified musketeers. Once the war is needed, soldiers can be recruited from the colonies. However, Marin did not follow European traditions. For example, in the colonies of New York and New Jersey, including the colony of Cape Breton Island, normal parliaments were not allowed. The parliamentary system is the root of colonial independence because the locals have too many rights. Marin prohibited the colonies from establishing parliaments, mainly because he was afraid that they would become independent in the future. However, residents were allowed to elect resident representatives to negotiate tax issues with the colonial authorities. Except for taxation, which can be negotiated, the colonies do not enjoy anything else. All laws are based on the North Sea mainland. All judges must also be graduates of the law department of the University of Warwick. This is a long-term vision, and there are no conditions for it at present. From the beginning, Marin did not intend to give the colonies the right to bargain. All governors must also be appointed by the mainland. Human desires are endless. If you give the colonies the ability to bargain from the beginning, then they will ask for more and more until they seek independence. Therefore, Marin simply blocked this door from the beginning. But at the same time, the colonies will be treated equally as overseas provinces, and the same system and laws will be implemented. In this way, the colonies and the mainland will be one in the future. The most feared thing for a country is difference. If everyone speaks the same language, wears the same clothes, and does the same things, then, who the hell wants to split? Therefore, Marin did not allow the colonies to differ from the mainland from the beginning. The colonies should have the same interests as the natives. Of course, in the same way, the obligations of the natives, such as the obligation to serve in the army, must also be fulfilled by the colonies. However, Marin has not dared to carry out compulsory military service in his homeland for fear of stimulating the princes in France. But there is no problem with the colony, because in the early days of the colony, early immigrants did need to have a certain ability to protect themselves. For example, when the buildings in Kenton Town were being built, Leighton publicly announced Marin's order: the residents of Kenton Town must receive musket shooting training when they are free. When necessary, they need to join the army to protect their homes. This order was not resisted. Because this group of immigrants is different from ordinary people. They are exiled criminals and have no right to speak. Marin can build houses for them and provide them with various conveniences, which is already very worthy of them. Moreover, participating in shooting training and defending their homes is originally for their own good. But they don't know that these are actually foreshadowings laid by Marin to promote the compulsory military service system. When they are all used to serving, Marin will have an army in his hands in the future. Moreover, the implementation of compulsory military service in America, far away from the European mainland, will not leak the news at all, and will not cause a backlash from European countries. In the future, when Marin pulls a large army from the colonies back to the mainland to fight, European countries will react. In addition, although these exiled peasant army prisoners of war are currently weak and prone to collapse. However, after training, the brave ones can always be selected from them. They dare to rebel, and they are actually more courageous than ordinary peasants. After training, they can be used as normal soldiers. Of course, many of them were forced to participate in the uprising. It doesn't matter. Anyway, in the future military training, officers will find out who is brave and who is cowardly. At that time, select the brave ones and bring them back to the mainland to participate in the war. For example, Leighton is now guarding Kenton with 200 soldiers, and his position is the captain of an understaffed company. But this group of immigrants has a total of 3,000 strong men, and they can organize training during the slack season. In the end, from these 3,000 people, Leighton will select 1,250 people to form a square. In wartime, he will be promoted from company captain to square commander. This is the reserve system under the compulsory military service system, and the 200 soldiers under Leighton, those with certain command capabilities, will be promoted to the next level and become grassroots officers in wartime. This is just this batch of immigrants. When the immigrants from Württemberg and Hungary arrive, it will not be a problem to select tens of thousands of elite soldiers from them and form an elite overseas legion. Chapter 1600, Hometown Avoidance System. In fact, the compulsory military service system that Marin implemented in the colonies is different from the compulsory military service system in later generations. The difference is that ordinary militia only trains in the shooting of muskets and the simplest cues, and does not conduct specific tactical training. Only the carefully selected elites will join the training of specific tactics and battle formations. Even those selected elites may have to stay in the barracks for a long time in the future, and they will no longer be ordinary people. Why do this? Because Marin is worried that ordinary people are too powerful and will lead to rebellion in the colonies. Therefore, for ordinary militia, Marin only lets the soldiers teach them to shoot with muskets and the simplest cues. Such people, even if they are pulled to the battlefield, are only cannon fodder, and they cannot be elite. In addition, no matter how well these people practice musket shooting, it is useless. Because the colonies do not produce gunpowder and lead bullets. Moreover, Marin does not allow the colonies to freely trade gunpowder and lead bullets, and must be strictly controlled. In this way, even if the people in the colonies have muskets in their hands, if they dare to rebel, Marin only needs to cut off the supply of gunpowder and lead bullets to easily dissolve their combat effectiveness. Without ammunition, what is a matchlock gun? It's just a fire stick. Therefore, Marin will not let people teach the civilians in the colonies to assassinate and fight, but teach them shooting in simple left-right cue training. As long as they take good care of the ammunition, they will not be able to make any waves. As for the selected elites, they will become professional soldiers. Then, they may be transferred back to their homeland for service. After retirement, Marin will not allow them to return to their original place of residence. Instead, they will be rewarded with manors and even slaves, and open up new places for them to live. Anyway, there is nothing else in America but land. There is no problem in settling elite retired soldiers. As long as these people don't get together with that group of fellow villagers, even if something unexpected happens in the future, nothing will happen. What? You say these retired soldiers will rebel? Come on, those who rebel are all barefoot. Marin made these retired soldiers small landlords. Are they going to rebel after eating too much? Moreover, after they retire, they are at least in their 40s and have no fighting power. As long as they are not allowed to return home and there is no opportunity to train the young men in their hometown, it will be difficult for them to pose a threat. Do you really want to return home? Sure, you can go back home and continue to be a serf. If you don't want to be a serf and want to be a manor owner, you must accept the arrangement. In addition to preventing retired soldiers from returning home, Marin will also implement a system of avoiding the hometown of civil servants in the colonies. Its content is that officials are not allowed to serve in their hometowns to avoid the formation of local interest groups. In the Ming dynasty, it was even stipulated that Southerners serve in the north and Northerners serve in the south, so that civil servants could not serve in their hometowns. This policy did prevent the emergence of local tyrant officials, which was better than what was done in later generations. But there is also a problem, that is, it only stipulates that civil servants are not allowed to serve in their hometowns, but ignores the avoidance of petty officials. As a result, local tyrant officials were eliminated, but the petty officials in the government office were basically locals. These officials united and actually had the ability to override the foreign civil servants. If you want to really stop the local rural forces, the entire group of workers needs to avoid their hometowns. Generally speaking, the bully forces must be protected by local rural forces, and the bullies must be locals. If even ordinary workers can avoid their hometowns, it will be too easy to crack down on gangs. After all, if you go to work in other places, will you protect the bullies there? If you have no relatives or friends, why protect them? If you don't deal with them, you may be implicated. If you kill them, you can add political achievements to yourself. Of course, Marin will not really make the petty officials avoid their hometowns. Why? This is for cost considerations. Because if the petty officials with low incomes also avoid their hometowns, then it may cause many problems. After all, this is not the era of developed transportation in later generations. Let so many officials leave their hometowns, there are many problems and high costs. Moreover, it is difficult for petty officials who are not familiar with the local environment to do things. To give a simple example, petty officials have to deal with villagers. As a result, in ancient times, except for scholars, ordinary people did not speak Mandarin, only dialects. If the clerks transferred from other places do not understand the local dialect and cannot communicate, how can they do things? Therefore, only after the popularization of Mandarin in later generations, can the clerks have the possibility of working in other places. Therefore, Marin will only learn the system of civil servants avoiding their hometowns for the colonies, and will not let the clerks avoid it together. As for the problem of civil servants being jointly hollowed out by local officials, Marin doesn't care at all. Why doesn't he care? Because officials and clerks don't get along, the rule of the North Sea Kingdom is more stable. If officials and clerks are in groups in the colonies, then rebellion is not far away. Therefore, Marin allows infighting among officials. Even, he will be happy. Of course, he can't fight too hard, so as not to delay work. Therefore, Marin will also arrange spies in the colonies to monitor the movements of the colonies. If the struggle in the local area gets out of control, the local area will hit the board. The simplest way is to transfer the civil servants and replace them with someone else. Of course, if the local clerks are too powerful, the local area will also find a way to transfer a few away, promote them in public and demote them secretly, and disintegrate their groups. By the same token, the army is never allowed to be stationed in the hometown. Because, if the elders of the hometown launched an uprising, if the army composed of the sons of the hometown, they would definitely not have the heart to shoot and suppress it. Marin understood this truth in his previous life when he read The Taking of the Bastille. At that time, the Great Revolution broke out in Paris, but the Parisian garrison refused to shoot and suppress it, which allowed the citizens of Paris to successfully make trouble. What if foreign soldiers were stationed in Paris? What? Uprising? It's not the elders of the hometown, brothers, open fire. When the soldiers and the people are people who have nothing to do with each other, the soldiers will not show mercy when they suppress it. After all, if they are not acquaintances, there is no scruple to take action. Even if their hands are stained with blood, after retiring, those soldiers will not stay in the local area, and they are not afraid of retaliation. The construction of Kenton is in full swing. However, when Leighton directed the people to build houses, he left the central area, leaving a large area. Because this place is to be used to build a church. According to the European practice of this era, churches are generally built in the center of the city or other prominent locations. Moreover, churches in big cities often leave large tracts of open space as church squares. However, at present, Leighton only has 200 soldiers and 800 strong men, and it is impossible to build a church. He can only build adobe houses for ordinary people to live in. As for the church in the center of the city, including the school planned to be built next to the church, we can only wait until the Archbishop Taylor of the North Sea Kingdom sends his disciples to arrive, and then summon a group of craftsmen to build the church and school. After all, the church is a top-level and important building in Europe at present. It is impossible to deal with it carelessly with adobe houses. At least it must be a brick and stone structure. Otherwise, it is disrespectful to God and will be excommunicated. Of course, in order to save costs, except for some important cathedrals, Marin plans to use red bricks and cement to deal with churches in general villages and towns. For example, the church in Kenton, because it is not a big city, it will definitely not be extravagant to build it all with stone. So, first build an earth kiln locally and then burn red bricks. Meanwhile, get some cement from the cement works at Corner Brook, Newfoundland. Build the walls with bricks and cement the outside. Then, the outside was painted with white lime, and it looked spotless. A simple village church was completed. Moreover, the building quality would not be bad. Of course, this would have to wait until the North Sea Kingdom sent relevant missionaries, that is, the disciples of Archbishop Taylor. Then, a professional construction team would be brought over. Before that, Leighton should just honestly lead the people to build low-cost but very practical adobe houses. Chapter 1601. The Emperor asks for help again. When Leighton led the first batch of exiled immigrants to build the town of Kenton across from Philadelphia in full swing, Marin was escorting more than 100,000 Württemberg serf families back home along the Rhine. There were too many people this time, and the fleet brought by Marin could not accommodate them. Therefore, Marin simply let the elderly, weak, women and children who had difficulty walking take the boat. As for the middle-aged men and women and young girls, they all followed the fleet along the river. Marin himself rode a horse and escorted thousands of people along the way. So many people and horses shocked the vassal states along the way. But in the end, no one dared to object. Because the vassal states along the way were either bishop states under the Holy See or small vassal states such as the Earldom of Nassau, and they did not dare to explode. Don't look at the Nassau family later becoming the ruling or even king of the Netherlands, but that was later. Now, as long as the Nassau family dares to show off in front of Marin, even if Marin only brought a few thousand people, he can destroy it. In this era, the Nassau family can only be regarded as a passerby in the German states. The strength is not bad, but not strong, and there is no right to speak at all. Moreover, since the 6th Legion returned to his homeland, Marin is now very confident. If someone dares to provoke, he doesn't mind teaching the other party a lesson. Fortunately, no one is a fool, even a prince like Frederick III is unwilling to provoke Marin easily. What's more, at this time Marin sent troops to help King Vladislas II of Bohemia suppress the Hungarian peasant uprising. If you provoke Marin at this time, it is equivalent to slapping Vladislas II in the face, and the risk is too great. You know, Vladislas II is not only the king of Bohemia and the king of Hungary. His brother Sigismund I is also the king of Poland and the Grand Duke of Lithuania. It is not a good idea to offend the Jagiellon royal family. Therefore, although he was envied and hated, Marin still brought more than 100,000 people along the Rhine River to the Ruhr area without any danger. Arriving in the Ruhr area, this is Marin's home ground. All materials can be transferred from warehouses everywhere, and all facilities can be temporarily requisitioned. Afterwards, Marin settled most of the immigrants in the Recklinghausen area on the south bank of the Lippe River, a tributary of the Rhine. The first batch of immigrants were first transported to Emden by ship. As for Marin himself, after leaving most of the soldiers, he returned to Aurich with a few hundred cavalrymen. After all, there is no risk in the North Sea. If someone comes to rob people, Marin doesn't mind leading the troops to talk with him. Marin's life is going smoothly, while Emperor Maximilian I's life is more tormented. Because, on the Swiss battlefield, the Habsburg family has fallen behind. After the Swiss mercenary general Sieg led 10,000 Swiss mercenary veterans back to Switzerland, the original advantage of the Habsburg family disappeared. These 10,000 Swiss veterans are not comparable to the Swiss mountain people trained by the French later. They are the most ferocious among the Swiss mountain people. Otherwise, they would not have taken the lead in going abroad to fight. Therefore, in the subsequent tug-of-war in central Switzerland, the Habsburg army suffered several losses. Frundsberg suffered defeat in several field battles. Since Sieg was inspired by Marin, he especially likes to send troops to encircle the enemy from the left and right. His tactics are to confront the enemy with the Swiss phalanx in the front, and then send 1 or 2 troops from the side to attack the enemy's weak points from the side and rear. Under the guidance of this tactic, Frundsberg was defeated in several battles in central Switzerland. But fortunately, Frundsberg has been with Marin for a long time, and has certain precautions against conspiracies and sneak attacks from the side and rear. Therefore, despite several defeats, Frundsberg's losses were not large, only 2,000 or 3,000 people were lost. If a different commander was replaced, the Habsburg army in Switzerland might have been defeated by now. In desperation, Frundsberg had to retreat, abandoning the territory gained from the previous counterattack, and retreating to the Lucernau-Basel line where he had retreated before, relying on the complex terrain for defense. Then, the two sides entered a stalemate. After all, the Swiss spearmen were good at field battles, but they were not very good at sieges. However, with the end of the Naples War, after the French withdrew 20,000 main forces from Naples, Frundsberg also panicked. Because now the French have freed up their hands. If they join forces with the Swiss resistance, then the previous balance will be immediately broken. Moreover, not to mention whether the French will send a large army to the north, the 16,000 people currently stationed in Milan alone make Maximilian I sleepless. Why? Because it is said that Louis XII has sent people to Milan and asked Ludendorff to lead troops to attack Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, and his thousands of remnants hiding in the Mustère Valley. This is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that in addition to the order to attack Duke Ludovico Sforza's troops, Louis XII also required Ludendorff's army to take advantage of the situation to enter the Graubünden area in southeastern Switzerland after conquering the Mustère Valley to cut off the connection between the Swiss region and Austria. Once this happens, the more than 30,000 Habsburg troops fighting in Switzerland will become isolated and unable to get effective and sufficient support from Austria. Of course, it is not completely impossible to support. However, it is very inconvenient to take a detour from the north of Switzerland. Moreover, if that army occupies Graubünden, it is not as simple as cutting off the supply line of the Frundsberg army. Because, as long as this army occupies Graubünden, it can attack the Habsburg family's native Austria in the east and the back of the Frundsberg army in the west, which can be said to be at ease. So, Maximilian I, who got the news, was panicked and a little at a loss. So he released a pigeon to contact Marin, hoping that Marin would help him make a decision. Moreover, he also hoped that Marin would send troops to help. After reading the emperor's letter for help, Marin frowned and thought for a long time. It is impossible to send troops directly, not to mention that the North Sea Kingdom is short of troops now. Even if the troops are sufficient, he can't send troops casually. Why? Because this will anger France and the Prince's alliance. If I send troops to Switzerland to support the Habsburg family, maybe the French army and the Prince's coalition will hit the North Sea country. Therefore, sending troops directly is not advisable and the risk is too great. However, if you don't support the emperor, once the Habsburg family is defeated, it will be a lot of fun. After all, the existence of the Habsburg family can not only contain France, but also the Prince's alliance. If the Habsburg family is finished, Marin's North Sea Kingdom will soon emerge and become a target. This is similar to the relationship between the United States, the Soviet Union and China in later generations. With the Soviet Union in front, the Americans will not pay too much attention to China, and even try to win over China. After the Soviet Union was finished, the Americans would come to China for nothing. Fortunately, China also has nuclear weapons, otherwise it would not be suppression, but a real fight. Although the strength of the Habsburg family is not as good as that of the North Sea Kingdom at the moment. However, Maximilian I holds the title of emperor and has the ambition to unify Germany, and his sarcasm is Max. With the emperor in front, Marin has the opportunity to concentrate on development. Otherwise, everyone will focus on Marin, which will be very uncomfortable. Therefore, no matter what, we must help the emperor get through this level, otherwise, Marin will be under great pressure. Chapter 1602 Material Support and Reinforced Concrete. To be honest, Marin despises Maximilian I. You are not strong enough, why pretend to be a big boss? If Maximilian I had not said that he wanted to unify Germany when he was young, he would not be resisted by the whole of Germany now. Although he has become mature and wise when he is older, he has to pay for his youth. Since he expressed his desire to unify Germany, most of the princes have been wary of him except for the Swabian League who huddled together with him. Even Marin was shocked. After all, Marin started his career with Maximilian I. However, everyone was afraid that Marin would become Maximilian I's thug and pioneer in unifying Germany, so they made things difficult for Marin. If it weren't for this unlucky reason, Marin would have been in the German region long ago, so why would he need to be patient? Look at the expansion of the North Sea Kingdom. Almost all of them were Marin who lured his opponents to fight him first, and then he dared to kill his opponents and then annex them. If he had not been implicated by the emperor, Marin would not have needed to go through so much trouble and would have just started to fight directly. At most, he could form alliances and pull a group of people to expand together. But there is no if in history, and Marin cannot re-elect. At the beginning, when he first crossed over, he was shocked by the emperor's reputation and foolishly surrendered to the past without studying the emperor's poor diplomatic situation. If he could do it again, he would not be willing to surrender to the emperor who was the enemy of the world. But now it has come to this point, and it is too late to regret. Therefore, Marin can only try his best to remedy the situation and help the unlucky emperor. Of course, what Marin did was not authentic. Because he ruined the Habsburg family's chance to unite Spain. Therefore, he and the emperor, the eldest brother does not say the second brother, let alone who is pitting who, just pit each other. Since it is not possible to send troops directly, then we can only find ways to support the emperor from other aspects. Marin opened the map and analyzed the situation on the Swiss battlefield in detail. After thinking for a long time, he still planned to support the emperor's muskets. After all, the Habsburg family's army is now in a disadvantageous position and is in a defensive position. When defending, the role of muskets is very large. Especially when defending the city, there is a group of musketeers on the top of the city, which can beat the attacking party without temper. No matter how fierce the Swiss mercenaries are, they have to retreat when encountering dense musket shooting, otherwise they will suffer heavy casualties. Originally in history, Frundsberg, known as the father of German mercenaries, broke the myth of Swiss mercenaries by using a large number of musketeers among German mercenaries. At present, Frundsberg's army relies on the Spanish phalanx learned from himself and the advantage of muskets to fight against the fierce Swiss veterans. If it is pure melee, the fierce Swiss veterans can make the soldiers under Frundsberg kneel down and call them daddy. Even if Marin himself brings the veterans of the North Sea Kingdom, he dare not say that pure melee can beat those Swiss veterans. Therefore, providing the Habsburg family army with enough guns and ammunition is a very good means of support. Not only should muskets and ammunition be provided to the Swiss garrison in Frundsberg, but also to the Duke of Milan Ludovico Sforza and his thousands of men hiding in the Muster Valley. After all, the Muster Valley is also a strategic place. If a solid fortress is built, equipped with enough muskets and ammunition, even if Gudendorf has an advantage in military strength, it will be difficult to break through here. Thinking of this, Marin immediately arranged to prepare enough muskets and ammunition to support the emperor. As for muskets, it happened that the North Sea military factory was currently producing them at full capacity. Originally, this was prepared for the militia in the colonies. After all, Marin originally planned to let the militia in the colonies learn to shoot with muskets. Therefore, he prepared a lot of muskets, a full 8,000 muskets ready, and planned to ship them to the colonies. However, considering the needs of the emperor, Marin temporarily intercepted the batch of matchlock guns and sent people to secretly transport them to Basel, which was controlled by the emperor's army. Basel happened to be the uppermost end of the Rhine River. At the same time, Marin would provide dozens of tons of saltpeter to the emperor, which was also transported to Basel by ship. In fact, Maximilian I was not unaware of the benefits of guns and cannons, but he was short of saltpeter. The current saltpeter in Europe was basically taken out by saltpeter officials from the toilets and stables of the people's homes. The amount was very small and not enough. Only Spain, Portugal and Marin's North Sea Kingdom could buy saltpeter from India. However, in recent years, the Spanish and Portuguese seem to have reached a tacit understanding. They divided most of the Indian saltpeter, leaving only a small share for Marin. Fortunately, Marin has opened up the China route and started to develop Chilean saltpeter. Otherwise, the North Sea Kingdom would not have enough gunpowder for its guns and cannons. For example, this time, it was Conti who purchased 100,000 kilograms of saltpeter from China and transported it back to the North Sea Kingdom. 100,000 caddies of saltpeter is 50 tons, which is just right. Marin gave it to Maximilian I. With these 50 tons of saltpeter, 3/4 of an ounce, 21.2 grams, of gunpowder per bullet, the saltpeter content in gunpowder is 75%. Each time you shoot, you only need 15.9 grams of saltpeter. Then, 50 tons of saltpeter is enough to fire 3.144 million times. Enough to beat the attacking party to a pulp. As for sulfur, charcoal, lead bullets, etc., Marin doesn't need to support them. Because these things are everywhere in Europe, there is no shortage. Of course, Marin can't openly support the emperor's muskets and saltpeter. Therefore, when transporting muskets and saltpeter to Basel, Marin will send grain ships in the name of selling grain. Then, hide the muskets and saltpeter in the bottom of the cabin, and pile them with grain. In this way, you can hide the ears and eyes of the princes along the way. Of course, these things are not defeated, but borrowed. But Marin did not ask for interest, which was considered to be giving the emperor enough face. However, His Majesty the Emperor has now signed a lot of debts, and whether he can repay them is a question mark. But Marin is not short of that money, and he will not ask for it. After all, the emperor is his shield, and it is very useful to keep it. In addition, Marin also plans to support His Majesty the Emperor and the Duke of Milan with a batch of cement and construction workers. Because Marin learned from the intelligence of his men that the fortifications near the Muster Valley and Lucerne did not seem to be so solid. Therefore, Marin will send people to support a batch of cement and steel bars, and send a team of engineers to the Muster Valley and Lucerne area to help build a batch of reinforced concrete fortifications to strengthen the defense capabilities of the Allies. The reason why Marin sent engineers there was not only because he was worried that his allies did not know how to use cement, but also because he wanted to keep it secret. After all, cement is also one of the secrets of the North Sea Kingdom. With fortifications built of reinforced concrete, matchlock guns and sufficient ammunition, even if the enemy was strong, it would be difficult to break through the defenses of Frundsberg's army in Switzerland and Duke Ludovico of Milan in the Muster Valley. Chapter 1603 Bribery. Maximilian I was also lucky. After Louis XII returned to Paris, he was busy making a little man with Queen Anne, who had become an aunt, hoping to give birth to a prince to unite England. Therefore, he had no time to care about the things in Switzerland during this period. Otherwise, the Habsburg family probably didn't even have time to react. You know, Spain doesn't have the strength to join forces with the Habsburg family at the moment, and more than half of Marin's men are also tied up on the British Isles and the Irish Isles. At this time, if France concentrates its energy, whether it is to go to Switzerland to join forces with the Swiss to eliminate the main force of the Habsburg family, or to take the opportunity to annex the Netherlands, it is a great opportunity. Unfortunately, none of this matters. For Louis XII, giving birth to a son is probably the most important thing. If he can use his son to unite England, the century-old enemy, the whole of France will probably celebrate. In addition, Marin's swing training method for the sailors' competition that showed force in the port of Emden was indeed passed on to France. Now, while Louis XII was busy making the little man, he was also ordering the selection of fighting masters from the army to use the oversized swing to train the ability to balance at sea. The French actually did not lack ships, they just cut down some oak trees to build ships. Moreover, even if there were not enough French oak trees for shipbuilding, the French could buy warships from the Portuguese. Because the Portuguese were not stupid. Although the Portuguese joined forces with the Spanish to deal with the Venetians and Arabs on the issue of India. However, the Portuguese always understood that Spain was their real mortal enemy. Therefore, the Portuguese would not mind selling some warships to France and causing some trouble for Spain. This is diplomacy, the enemy of the enemy is an excellent object of alliance. Of course, the Portuguese could not go bankrupt to support the French. Because if the Spaniards were really overthrown by the French, the Portuguese would not be spared. Therefore, the Portuguese would sell warships to France, but not many. Louis XII also knew that it was basically wishful thinking to want to surpass Britain or Spain in naval strength. But Louis XII couldn't help wanting to reserve some sailors to prepare for the future war with England. Because Louis XII was also prepared to not have a son before the end of 1515. At that time, Louis XII planned to use force. Whether it succeeds or not, it's a try. What if it succeeds? Therefore, outside the city of Paris, there are many French warriors hanging on large swings to practice the swordsmanship of sailors' scimitars. And this news has also caused unanimous concern from England and the North Sea. But Marin really doesn't think highly of the French Navy. What's the use of your PK skills on the deck? I got dozens of gunboats, all with heavy artillery, and sank all the warships that the French had finally put together, and let all the warriors carefully trained by the French go to the sea to feed the fish. But in that case, the North Sea and France will really fight to the death. Therefore, Marin hopes that the medicine offered by John Cabot can torment Louis XII to death as soon as possible. In this way, it will not be so troublesome. After all, if Louis XII died, François I would marry Princess Claude, and he would not dare to compete with Marin for his daughter-in-law. Unless, he did not want to be the King of France. However, it is really not easy to kill Louis XII. Louis XII is not a person like Conrad, the Bishop of Munster, and he cannot be moved lightly. Bishop Conrad Marin sent someone to kill him without any pressure. Anyway, Bishop Conrad was just an unlucky guy who had been abandoned by the church a long time ago, and even his title of prince was deprived. Getting rid of him quietly would not cause much repercussions. But Louis XII is different. He is the monarch of the most powerful country in Europe and a big boss who has attracted worldwide attention. Not to mention, Marin is not capable of assassination easily. Even if the assassination is successful, if it is found out, Marin will definitely not be able to eat it. Because if this matter is exposed, Marin will definitely become a street rat in Europe, and everyone will shout and beat him, and even the Pope's father-in-law can't save him. Therefore, Marin could only hope that Louis XII would collapse physically and die in a woman's belly like in history, and he did not dare to send someone to assassinate him easily. As for the Swiss side, Louis XII made a villain with the Queen while training sailors on land, and he did not forget to find fault with Maximilian I. After all, the two are old rivals. It is a bit difficult to send the French army directly, and France also lacks a reason to take action. Therefore, Louis XII thought of using Ludendorff's 16,000 German mercenaries to complete this matter. Ludendorff is now in a dilemma because he does not want to turn against the Habsburg family. The reason for this is that he himself is a declining noble from the Swabian region and still has the title of baron on his head. However, the ancestral fiefdoms have been lost. He had no choice but to become a mercenary. Moreover, before this, Ludendorff's mercenaries mostly served the nobles and the Habsburg family in the Swabian region. Even fighting for the Spanish was a business introduced by the Habsburgs. Now, Ludendorff is in a dilemma when he turns around to deal with the Habsburgs. But the problem is that when he signed the employment agreement with Louis XII, Ludendorff only insisted on refusing to fight with his original employer, Spain, but did not say that he refused to fight with the Habsburgs. The French seized this point and forced him to attack the remnants of the Duchy of Milan in the Mustare Valley, and then attack the Graubünden region. Traditional Germans are stubborn, and Ludendorff is such a person. It is true that he is unwilling to be an enemy of the Habsburgs, but the employment agreement does not include the Habsburgs as an enemy. So now Ludendorff is very conflicted. And this contradiction of his led to the 16,000 German mercenaries not immediately attacking the Mustare Valley, and also gave Marin and others the opportunity to prepare. In order to keep the Mustare Valley, a major transportation route connecting northern Italy to Switzerland, Marin also spent a lot of money, even taking out reinforced concrete. You know, even in the North Sea, there are not many reinforced concrete. This is because, although cement is not valuable, steel bars are difficult to make. The North Sea Kingdom now has only 2 small iron smelting blast furnaces. Although it produces enough guns and cannons, it is still unable to make steel bars. After all, if a large project is built, a huge amount of steel bars are needed. And now the production of steel bars is all manual. Thicker straight bars are easier to make, just casting. But thinner wire rods are very difficult to process, and need to be made by craftsmen by hand, which is very expensive. Therefore, at present, only a few important fortresses such as Aurich in the North Sea Kingdom use reinforced concrete. There is no other place. Even in the future, when repairing water conservancy projects, Marin does not plan to use steel bars, but plans to use bamboo reinforced concrete made of bamboo. Only a few fortresses with strategic value will use reinforced concrete, which can prevent artillery bombardment. However, because of Ludendorff's hesitation, Marin's spies had time to investigate Ludendorff's background information. When Marin got Ludendorff's information, he looked at it and suddenly laughed. Maybe this man can be bribed. Marin thought. Then, he did it. He sent a pigeon to send a letter to the emperor, proposing to bribe Ludendorff. Chapter 1604, Outspoken. Why did Marin think that Ludendorff could be bribed? Because the intelligence collected by his spies showed that Ludendorff himself, as a Swabian, had a good impression of the Habsburg family. Moreover, the reason why he fought as a mercenary was actually to revitalize the family and restore the glory of the Leichingen family. At present, Ludendorff only has the title of Baron. The family territory has long been lost by his ancestors, and even the ancestral castle has been sold. Therefore, the reason why Ludendorff fought north and south and made money in these years was that he hoped to save enough money, and then buy a fief from the princes of Swabia as the foundation of the Leichingen family. If you want a title and a fief, who else in the entire Holy Roman Empire would be more qualified to reward it? Although Maximilian I was poor, the most he could give was the title and land. If it was a countship or something, Maximilian I might find it difficult to give. However, Maximilian I had plenty of baronies. After all, a barony can be almost done with just 10 small villages. And Maximilian I, who owned large tracts of land in Austria and the Netherlands, could still do it by giving some land. Moreover, Ludendorff had a big problem at the moment, that is, he was already 50 years old, but he had no legal heirs as heirs. It's not that Ludendorff had no sons, but that his only son had died unexpectedly 5 years ago and left no offspring. Later, Ludendorff's wife also died of grief. After that, Ludendorff had no legal heirs, and neither did his daughter. However, Ludendorff had 3 illegitimate children. These were the children of Ludendorff and a merchant's daughter, 2 boys and 1 girl, all of whom were not young. The eldest son, Denton, was already 18 years old and was currently following Ludendorff in the mercenaries, accumulating enough prestige in order to take over the mercenaries in the future. Why did he let Denton inherit his mercenary group? Because, this is the only possibility for Danton, a bastard, to become a noble. Let's talk about the famous Sforza family in Italy. It was originally just a peasant family. But relying on the mercenaries in their hands and marrying the daughter of the Visconti family, which had no descendants, the Sforza family became the ruling family of the Duchy of Milan. Although the French were dissatisfied and robbed the Duchy of Milan many times, this is indeed a shortcut to becoming a noble. With soldiers in hand, it is very likely that you will find a monarch to make military exploits and become a hereditary noble. It was because Marin knew Ludendorff's idea that he felt that Ludendorff could be bought. Ludendorff worked so hard just to seek the identity and fiefdom of hereditary nobles for his illegitimate son. Perhaps, this is difficult for ordinary people, but for Maximilian I, who has the title of emperor, this is simply a piece of cake. Moreover, as the Holy Roman Emperor, the nobles canonized by Maximilian I are the most authoritative in the entire Holy Roman region. Even the princes who hated the Habsburg family had to recognize the legal status of the nobles personally conferred by Maximilian I. The nobles conferred by the emperor were imperial nobles, not comparable to the nobles of ordinary principalities. For example, the earls of the Grand Duchy of the North Sea and Marin, once they left the Grand Duchy of the North Sea, no one would think that they could be on an equal footing with the earls who were princes. Because these were nobles conferred by the princes themselves, they were naturally inferior to the nobles of the same rank recognized by the empire. But the nobles conferred by the Emperor Maximilian I were different. As the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, the nobles he conferred were not only universal throughout the Holy Roman Empire, but also recognized by all of Europe outside the Holy Roman Empire. For example, France, they could not recognize Maximilian I as the Byzantine Emperor, but they had to recognize him as the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. As the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, the nobles conferred by Maximilian I were not only recognized within the Holy Roman Empire, but also useful throughout Europe. Of course, pagan Turkey and the Orthodox Grand Duchy of Moscow are exceptions. As long as it is a Catholic country, the nobles who have been crowned by Maximilian I must be recognized. Of course, this is the canonization of titles below the Earl. Maximilian I can do it casually, and no one will care. But if it reaches the level of Earl, especially the Earl of the Prince level, it requires the recognition of the imperial parliament. But Maximilian I can canonize a landless Earl, but he does not need the recognition of the imperial House of Princes. The significance of the existence of the imperial House of Princes is to review the identity of the princes. For example, Marin took a lot of effort to be accepted by the imperial House of Princes and became a recognized imperial prince. But Gudendorf is different. His son Denton is just an illegitimate child. It is very difficult for him to become a nobleman. His starting point is lower than that of Marin. After all, Marin is a legitimate child and a noble son who is unanimously recognized. Gudendorf's son, Denton, was just an illegitimate child without any status and rights. It was much more difficult for him to become a noble than Marin. For Denton, who had no status, it was considered good luck to be a knight, and it was simply unimaginable to become a baron. So, Marin sent a pigeon to Maximilian I, suggesting that he send someone to contact Gudendorf secretly, promising to ensure that his illegitimate son would inherit Gudendorf's baron title and give him a fief as his baron's territory. In this way, Gudendorf could be won over. Not to mention that Gudendorf could immediately turn against the French, but at least he could make Gudendorf work without effort in attacking the Muster Valley. As long as the Muster Valley is not breached, then Switzerland is safe, and the Habsburg family is also safe. But unexpectedly, Maximilian I was a stubborn person, and he was unwilling to easily give the baronial title and fiefdom, and was only willing to confer Danton as a fief knight. Maximilian I sent people to contact Gudendorf in this way, and Marin also received this news. Sure enough, Gudendorf was dissatisfied with Danton being conferred as a non-hereditary fief knight, and planned to refuse Maximilian I's solicitation. After all, Gudendorf did not want his grandson to become a civilian. When Marin heard the news, he was furious. He immediately wrote a letter and sent it to Maximilian I by pigeon. This time, the tone of Marin's letter was quite impolite, and almost made Maximilian I sick. Marin pointed out in the letter that Maximilian I clung to the dogma of the past and took the title too seriously. For example, Frundsberg, although he could be made a count for his military exploits, is still only a baron, and has not even become a viscount, deputy count. Moreover, the conditions offered by Maximilian I this time were too stingy. For a big man with 16,000 mercenaries, he was only willing to give the title and territory of a fief knight. Marin pointed out bluntly in the letter that if Gudendorf attacked with all his strength this time and invaded Switzerland, Frundsberg's army, which was attacked from all sides, might perish. At that time, let alone the land of Switzerland, the enemy might even take the opportunity to invade Austria. Without Austria, Emperor Maximilian I might not be able to keep his position. Marin also pointed out that the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire was just an honorary position, a nominal monarch with no real power. Therefore, it was important for the Habsburg family to occupy more territory. If Switzerland could not be saved, the Habsburg family would probably be doomed. Compared with the future of the family, a mere baron was nothing. If the Habsburg family was reluctant to give up a baron title and that little bit of land, it would be better for them to withdraw their troops from Switzerland and retreat to Austria as soon as possible. In that way, at least they could keep their capital. These words were too straightforward and directly hurt Maximilian I's self-esteem. But after being angry, Maximilian I sadly discovered that Marin was right. If the Habsburg family was completely defeated on the Swiss battlefield, not only would they not be able to save Switzerland, but the enemy could even take advantage of the situation to invade Austria. By then, it would really be more trouble than gain. So, after thinking it over again and again, Maximilian I finally stopped being stingy on this point and agreed to confer the title of Baron to Gudendorf's illegitimate son Denton and grant him a certain fiefdom. Anyway, if Switzerland is saved, a mere barony can still be squeezed out. Moreover, if Denton becomes a vassal of the Habsburg family in Switzerland, then, Gudendorf's tens of thousands of troops will stand firmly on the side of the emperor to help him guard Switzerland. However, Marin did not expect that this incident would allow Maximilian I to open up his thinking and discover a new world. Then, His Majesty the Emperor was out of control. It is true that he had no money, but later on, by wholesale barons and baronies, he actually attracted a lot of thugs and successfully gained a foothold in Switzerland. Of course, this is a later story. Chapter 1605, General Staff System. As expected by Marin, when Maximilian I offered the conditions of baron and barony, Gudendorf accepted Maximilian I's solicitation. However, in order not to fall into the notoriety of breaking the contract and pitting the employer, Gudendorf did not directly and publicly turn to Maximilian I, but planned to adopt the method of working but not working to deal with the current employer Louis XII. The specific method is that Gudendorf led his troops to fight a fake battle with Ludovico Sforza's thousands of troops in the Mustare Valley. Gudendorf and Maximilian I agreed that after the battle, the musketeers of both sides would only load gunpowder when loading bullets, not lead bullets. Then, everyone pretended to shoot at each other to fool the supervisors sent by the French. If it doesn't work, just catch a few peasants in the Duchy of Milan, dress them up as soldiers, and let the Milan army guarding the Mustare Valley kill a group of them, so that the French representatives can see the tragic battle. Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, had no objection to this. Anyway, monarchs these days don't take the lives of ordinary people seriously. Of course, Maximilian I was not a good person either. The fief he gave to Gudendorf's son Danton was located in the small town of Marin on the shore of Lake Zurich in eastern Switzerland. The agricultural conditions here are good, after all, it is located on the shore of Lake Zurich. However, in order to keep this good fief, the Habsburg family's control over Switzerland must be guaranteed. Otherwise, if it is taken away by the Swiss alliance, the barony will be gone. Therefore, Gudendorf's army will inevitably become a thug of the Habsburg family in the future. After thinking it through, Maximilian I was very happy and felt that he had discovered a new world. Then, he suddenly had an idea and sent someone to secretly win over Sieg, the commander of the Swiss resistance army, and promised to confer him the title of Baron of Bern and make Bern his fief. The requirement is that Sieg leads the Swiss resistance army to join him. However, Maximilian I underestimated the hatred of the people in western Switzerland towards the Habsburg family. The eastern part of Switzerland belongs to the German-speaking area, so it is naturally more Germanized. For example, the Zurich area has resistance to the Habsburg family, but it is not so strong. The western part of Switzerland is a French-dominated area, and even the western part mainly speaks French. Unlike the eastern part, most of them are German and speak German. The Swiss in the French-speaking area are very hostile to the Habsburg family. They have been educated to hate and despise the Habsburg family since childhood. And Sieg, who happened to be born in the French-speaking area, naturally has no interest in the Habsburg family. Therefore, Maximilian I's wooing ended in failure. However, Maximilian I didn't care so much. Because as long as the French don't send their main force to the field in person, Frundsberg's army will not be afraid of the Swiss resistance army. And Gudendorf's fooling the French will also give the French the illusion of winning. Otherwise, if Gudendorf openly turned against them, the French might be so ashamed that they would send their main elite troops back to the country to join the war. And now this situation is the best. The French thought that Gudendorf's army would invade Switzerland and threaten Frundsberg's retreat. In this way, they would not intervene in the Swiss war for the time being. As for the more distant future, Marin hinted in his letter to Maximilian I that the Spaniards would not give up and would come back. Once the Spaniards come back, the French will have no energy to care about the war in Switzerland. In fact, Marin's guess was not wrong. The Spaniards are indeed preparing for a counterattack. However, Gonzalo de Cordova, who regained the power of the army, suggested that they take action after the autumn harvest. Because, by then, the army will have enough food. Moreover, these few months are just right for the Spaniards to train their troops to enhance their combat effectiveness. In addition, Gonzalo de Cordova, who had suffered a great loss from suspicion, was much smarter this time. This time, Gonzalo de Cordova decided not to monopolize power, but to let the Spanish army share power. Of course, the so-called decentralization of Gonzalo de Cordova does not mean sharing the command power, but sharing the control of the army with others. In order to dispel the suspicion of King Ferdinand II of Spain, Gonzalo de Cordova specifically proposed to divide the Spanish army into several parts. Except for the First Legion, which was controlled by Gonzalo de Córdoba himself, the commanders of other legions were appointed by the two Spanish kings. The task of these legion commanders was to control their respective armies. However, when the war started, these legion commanders had to obey the command of Gonzalo de Córdoba. Unless Gonzalo de Córdoba ordered a rebellion. Otherwise, they could not refuse the order. At the same time, Gonzalo de Córdoba did not give the middle and lower level officers of those legions the right to directly issue orders, which had to be conveyed through their legion commanders to take effect. Moreover, in normal times, Gonzalo de Córdoba has no right to manage other legions except the First Legion. At most, he can only supervise the training results of several legions and cannot directly interfere in the affairs of other legions. In this way, as long as several legion commanders are the king's confidants, there is no need to worry about Gonzalo de Córdoba's power being too great or even rebelling. This plan was immediately welcomed by Ferdinand II and Juan III. Because the dispersion of military power makes them feel a lot more at ease. After all, the whole country's troops are in the hands of a certain person, and no monarch can be at ease. And Marin of the North Sea Kingdom personally served as the commander-in-chief in every war, so he naturally didn't worry about the loss of military power. In fact, this suggestion was also provided to Gonzalo de Córdoba by Marin through spies in Spain. In other words, this is a variant of the general staff system in later generations. In later Germany, the general staff is a very special existence. This department does not control the army in normal times, but once a war breaks out, the army of the whole country will be provided with tactical guidance and decision-making by the officers of the general staff. In other words, the general staff is responsible for commanding and giving orders, but not for the specific command of troops. The generals who specifically command troops do not have the power to make decisions. In this way, the danger of a commander having too much military power is avoided. The plan that Marin provided to Gonzalo de Córdoba through spies is actually a variant of the general staff system. In this variant, the famous General Gonzalo de Córdoba is the general staff alone and is no longer responsible for the specific control of all troops. Usually, all corps except the First Corps are managed by other corps commanders. Only after the war, Gonzalo de Córdoba, the commander-in-chief, has the power to command each corps. But if an order to revolt is issued, each corps commander has the right to refuse or even take action. In fact, Marin had long planned to implement the general staff model in the North Sea Kingdom. But the problem is that there is a shortage of military advisors in the North Sea Kingdom, let alone a general staff. Therefore, this system can only be promoted and implemented after these children grow up. Fortunately, I am not old yet and can personally command the army. But when I am old and Caesar comes to power, the North Sea Kingdom should have enough qualified staff officers. At that time, it will be natural to establish a general staff system. With the existence of the general staff system, the military decision-making of the North Sea Kingdom will not make low-level mistakes in the future. At the same time, the separation of decision-making power and control power can also avoid the rebellion of generals. In the future, the North Sea Kingdom will maintain multiple legions. However, the legions are not subordinate to each other, and the general staff does not have the right to command the legions in peacetime. In fact, the rank of the general staff is not higher than that of the legion commanders. However, the legion commanders do not have the right to mobilize troops. In wartime, the legion commanders obey the command of the general staff. In peacetime, they obey the command of the king, excluding the right to declare war. In this way, it can fully prevent a military strongman from appearing and commanding the army to rebel. Chapter 1606, Children and Grandchildren Have Their Own Blessings. In fact, the general staff system is nothing new. As early as the founding of the Ming dynasty, Zhu Di, the emperor of the Ming dynasty, established a cabinet with a low position and great power. However, the cabinet at that time was completely different from the cabinet in the middle and late Ming dynasty. The cabinet created by Zhu Di had a very low rank of cabinet ministers, only the 5th rank, one level lower than the 4th rank of the lower prefect. But the cabinet had the support of the emperor and could compete with the 6 ministers. But without the support of the emperor, the cabinet ministers of only the 5th rank could not compete with the 6 ministers. In this way, the cabinet had to rely on the emperor to compete with the 6 ministries. And the emperor also firmly grasped the power. Unfortunately, Zhu Di's descendants did not understand the mystery and kept upgrading the rank of the cabinet. The cabinet that was originally lowly powerful became highly powerful. Especially when it came to Emperor Jiajing, who liked to cultivate immortals, the cabinet chief could check and balance the 6 ministries without the emperor. Then, the role of the emperor was dispensable. When it came to the Wanli period, Emperor Wanli sadly discovered that the pit his grandfather had dug was too big, and now the cabinet could do it alone without him as the emperor. Then, the disheartened Wanli simply did not go to court for decades. Anyway, it was useless for him to go, and the cabinet no longer needed him. Therefore, the cabinet in the late Ming dynasty had become a superpower that could replace the emperor. With power no less than that of the monarch, there were naturally more people who were jealous. Therefore, the party struggles in the late Ming dynasty were extremely fierce. Because everyone knew that whoever controlled the cabinet would gain power comparable to the imperial power. And after gaining power comparable to the imperial power, the civil servants who entered the cabinet were so full. At the end of the Ming dynasty, Emperor Chongzhen was the poorest in the whole capital, and those civil servants were all rich. In the final analysis, it was the fool Jiajing who was busy cultivating immortals and delegated all power to Yen Song, the chief minister of the cabinet, which caused the cabinet to be too big to be removed. He could rely on Jinyui to take back the power, but once the convention was formed, his descendants did not have the means to use the factory guards, so they could only be hollowed out by the cabinet. Therefore, with the lessons of the Ming dynasty, Marin added a principle when drafting the document for the establishment of the general staff. The general staff only has command power in wartime, and those who dare to interfere with the command of the army in peacetime will be shot. In addition, Marin repeatedly emphasized that the general staff has no subordinate relationship with the army and its status is not higher than that of the local army commander. Even the king has no right to change this. If the king of the future has the intention of forcibly amending it, the ministers can depose him according to this clause. This clause is very cruel, that is, Marin is afraid that his descendants will mess around like the emperors of the Ming dynasty. Jiajing was not the first emperor to improve the status of the cabinet. His predecessors also made great efforts to improve the status of the cabinet. In short, it is not the responsibility of Jiajing alone. The status of the Ming dynasty cabinet was improved step by step, not in one step. By the end of the Ming dynasty, the cabinet could bully the emperor. Marin was unwilling to see the situation of the Ming dynasty cabinet, so when he established the general staff in the future, he would publicly announce these two principles, and even the later monarchs could not violate them. Otherwise, he would be deposed according to law. Of course, in addition to the general staff system, Marin had to consider another military boss, the Minister of Military Affairs, who was the Minister of Defense in later generations. The status of this person is definitely higher than that of the local corps commander and the general staff. How to prevent this person from monopolizing military power is also a very important issue. Because, in normal times, the general staff cannot mobilize the army, but the Minister of Military Affairs must have the right. After all, in theory, the status of the Minister of Military Affairs is second only to the king in the army. Marin thought about it and finally decided that the Minister of Military Affairs could only mobilize units below the corps level when mobilizing troops. If a unit at the corps level is mobilized, the king must be consulted. Then, the royal family will issue an order. The Minister of Military Affairs has no right to directly issue orders to units at the corps level. In addition, Marin also plans to imitate the later Maozi and set up an internal security force to specifically surround the capital. This army is controlled by the king himself, and no one else has the right to intervene. Moreover, its establishment is directly under the royal family, not under the jurisdiction of the Minister of Military Affairs, and the Minister of Military Affairs has no right to mobilize any soldier of the internal security force. In other words, this force is the palace guard of the North Sea Kingdom. Of course, this is all for the future. It is too early to say this in the current North Sea Kingdom. Marin knows very well that his generation must be in control of the military power himself. After all, he has hundreds of years of military knowledge ahead of the times in his mind, and no one can do better than him. However, he dare not guarantee that his descendants will also have military talents. If you meet a military idiot and monopolize military power, it is very likely that he will bury the elite of the country like the idiot Mingyingzong. Therefore, Marin will definitely hand over the military power in the future, leaving only the guards of the capital, which will be firmly controlled by the royal family. Other local armies will be taught to the general staff to command the war, and they will be handed over to the Ministry of National Defense for management at ordinary times. Of course, military expenditures must also be borne by the cabinet. Unlike the current North Sea Kingdom, military expenditures are all borne by Marin personally. Fortunately, the price of grain in Europe is expensive these days, and Marin has kept the secret of high grain yields. Otherwise, Marin would not be able to feed so many troops. However, in the future, the secret of high grain yield will definitely leak out. At that time, the Hoffman family will not be able to bear the military expenses of so many troops, and can only hand over the military expenses to the state tax revenue. Once this happens, the command of those troops will inevitably be transferred to the Ministry of Defense of the cabinet. At that time, the royal family will only have control over a guard corps to defend the capital to prevent the royal family from being easily overthrown. Those are all things in the future. Marin actually doesn't expect his descendants to occupy the throne all the time. He just hopes that his descendants can survive the French Revolution. As long as that wave survives, after entering the 19th century, even if the royal family is overthrown, it will not be easily sent to the guillotine. Marin never expected his descendants to be kings for generations, but only hoped that his descendants would not be slaughtered like chickens and dogs. As long as they can survive until after the 19th century, they will basically not be easily slaughtered. Royal families like the Qing dynasty, which were guilty of many crimes, could survive. Marin did not believe that his descendants would have a worse reputation than them. As long as they could hold out until the 19th century, his descendants would not be in danger of death. After the 19th century, royal family members were rarely killed worldwide. Even if they were overthrown, royal family members would generally go into exile abroad, and would not be massacred like before. Of course, if they could be like the British royal family, they could be a nominal monarch. At least, there would be no danger to their lives. However, Marin could only think about these. After all, children and grandchildren would have their own blessings, and he really could not control the affairs of his descendants. Chapter 1607, Brother-in-law, I'm pregnant again. No matter which dynasty the founding monarchs were, they were basically very capable and could hold on to any situation. Moreover, in general, even if the abilities of the first few generations of monarchs in each dynasty degenerated, they could still be maintained. However, after a few generations, it was uncontrollable. For example, the cabinet of the Ming dynasty was not able to compete with the emperor all at once. Even in the Chenghua period, there was still the saying of paper-pasted 3 cabinet elders, which showed that the power at that time could not compete with the imperial power. It was not until the 11th emperor Jiajing of the Ming dynasty that the cabinet had a lofty status of suppressing the 6 ministries and could compete with the emperor starting from Yen Song. Of course, Yen Song was more cunning and did not dare to challenge Jiajing, and his successor Su Jia was also a slippery head. But in the Longqing period, whether it was Gao Gong or Zhang Juzheng, who succeeded him later, because the status of the cabinet was elevated, they became the figures who had the final say in the Ming dynasty, and their power was no less than that of the prime minister before. In the same way, Marin has now created a mature system of general staff for later generations, but future generations may not understand the mystery and may make blind changes. 1 or 2 generations may not see any changes. After a long time, the general staff system, which was originally very good in the 21st century, may be changed into a foreign one by unworthy descendants. Thinking of this, Marin was really helpless and powerless. Therefore, he made strict regulations on the general staff system. The monarch cannot be changed at will, otherwise he will be deposed. Although it is a bit cruel, if it is not so cruel, it will definitely be changed at will. It is not possible, but it must be. The hereditary system is not good at this point, because you can't be sure whether your descendants have such abilities. For example, the military household system of the Ming dynasty, the father is as strong as an ox, brave and good at fighting, but it may not be the case if he has a son. Maybe, it is a sickly child. Such an heir goes to join the army. No wonder the Ming dynasty army was weak as slag later. The worst thing is that the officer position is also hereditary. Encountering a second-generation officer of a straw bag may ruin the names of tens of thousands of soldiers. Only like the imperial examination system, let everyone compete together, select 1 in a million, and eliminate the incompetent, can we ensure that the final winners are elites. For example, why can China rise in a few decades in later generations? Because the college entrance examination has been restored. This cruel elimination mechanism of thousands of troops crossing a single plank bridge may not necessarily select the real talents. However, at least those with insufficient abilities have been eliminated. There may be some unfairness, but it is generally good. At least, there is no fairer model than this. Some people may say that some poor students later did much better than the top students. However, everyone has overlooked a question: is the college entrance examination really for personal service? No, it is for selecting talents for the country. Especially for the scientists and engineers that the country needs most, it is most straightforward to select them using the college entrance examination model. Maybe these inconspicuous scientific research and engineering personnel cannot earn as much as those poor students, but the world will run the same without those bosses, and it will collapse immediately without those scientific research and engineering talents. Even if it does not collapse, the level of social science and technology will regress to the level of Africans. This is the real secret of compulsory education and the college entrance examination. It is to cultivate scientific research and engineering talents as the cornerstone for the entire country, not to teach people to make money. In other words, the national education system cultivates role-type talents who can contribute to the construction of the country. This kind of inconspicuous role-type talent may look inconspicuous, but the accumulation of a small amount can support the rise and takeoff of a great country. Although those businessmen are also part of society, they cannot be called the cornerstone. For example, if the country is a building, then those scientists and engineers are the bricks and reinforced concrete. And those businessmen, including celebrities, are the beautiful tiles on the exterior of the building. They are more glamorous than the talents who are the cornerstones, but without the theme of the cornerstone, they don't even have a living space. Without high enough productivity, businessmen have no goods to sell. If ordinary people don't have spare money, the stars will be too poor to eat, or have low incomes, just like decades ago. Similarly, if the readers have no money, the coolies who write will also starve to death. The landlords have no surplus food, so how can they care about you? Therefore, although the most role-type workers in society are inconspicuous, they are the cornerstone of the whole world. Ordinary workers are bricks and tiles, while those scientific research and engineering talents are the steel beams that can support the construction of skyscrapers. They are all extremely important, and none of them can be missing. As a traverser, with hundreds of years of advanced knowledge, Marin is confident that he can make the right choice. Even if he can't be the best monarch, it's at least no problem to be qualified. However, it's hard to say about his descendants. After all, their descendants are not traversers, but ordinary natives of this time and space. It's okay for Caesar to have his own eyes on this child, but he can't take care of Caesar's descendants. Because, by then, he might be dead. Therefore, Marin thinks that if it doesn't work, it's better to implement the virtual monarch system. At least, it can ensure that future generations will not be overthrown or beheaded. For example, among the monarchs of later generations in Europe, only the countries that implemented the virtual monarch system have the royal family preserved. And the French kingdom, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Tsarist Russia, which have powerful monarchs, their monarchs were all overthrown without exception. Even, there are families that were killed. Thinking of this, Marin was a little depressed. He no longer expected his descendants to maintain the rule, just don't let the whole family be slaughtered. Of course, if there are many sons and grandsons, the danger will be greatly reduced. Just like Zhu Yuanzhang, he gave birth to more than 20 sons. When the Ming dynasty fell, there were 100,000 royal family members. Although many were killed by the Qing dynasty, many people still survived. Even the descendants became prime ministers. So, when sleeping at night, Marin hugged Angela and said emotionally, "Dear, when William is weaned, let's have a few more sons. I always feel that 2 sons are not enough." Angela was full of black lines when the old mother is as fertile as Taihu pigs. Angela's face was not good, and Marin could see it. But he was also helpless. Europe only allows monogamy. Even if a woman is fertile, how many babies can she give birth to? Some women simply can't give birth. Some women can give birth, but when giving birth to a certain baby, they hurt their bodies and can't give birth again. Then, this is a pit. Even if you have a huge empire, what can you do? If you can't give birth to an heir, you have to give away your huge foundation to others. Therefore, in European history, there are many nobles who have no heirs. As long as you marry a wife carelessly, you will have no descendants. Marin suddenly envied Paraguay, the only Christian country in the world in the future where you can marry 4 wives. In such a country, the possibility of extinction is too small. After all, it is impossible to be so lucky that all 4 wives are infertile. But that can only be thought about, because Marin's father-in-law is the Pope. As long as he dares to have this idea, he will be excommunicated. Moreover, the Catholic power is so strong now, how can it be done like this? When Paraguay did this, it was already the second half of the 19th century. At that time, the Vatican had no prestige and could not control Paraguay in the New World. However, little Ma Yun, who was going to be the governor of Dongfan Island, had no such taboo. If he went to the Ming dynasty, it would be no problem to marry 8 or 10 concubines. However, this guy was not a legitimate child, so even if he had more children, he would not have the right to inherit the throne of Beihai Kingdom. The next morning, when Marin was having breakfast, Felice, his sister-in-law and lover, ran over and said shyly, "Brother-in-law, I'm pregnant again." Poof, the soy milk in Marin's mouth sprayed all over the floor. Chapter 1608, Count of Uruguay. Marin was completely speechless. He was worried about the lack of legitimate sons, but illegitimate sons, Well, this is really planting flowers intentionally but not blooming, planting willows unintentionally but growing shade. Felice is not actually beautiful, she is dark-skinned. Maybe it fits the aesthetics of Europeans and Americans in the 21st century, wheat-colored skin. But in this era, Europeans also like white skin. As a Chinese, Marin also likes white skin. After all, later generations only heard of whitening, not tanning. But who said Felice is also the daughter of the Pope's father-in-law? In order to prevent his father-in-law's resources from being taken away by others, Marin could only reluctantly accept Felice, the little wild cat. Moreover, Felice's brother-in-law is really unbearable. Felice is not stupid either. She found that every time she called Marin brother-in-law in a coquettish tone, Marin would always tremble, but his interest would be high. In Marin's words, it's called role-playing, which is very exciting. However, this morning, Felice's brother-in-law, I'm pregnant again, is a bit scary. Of course, if it were in modern times, Marin would definitely have his legs broken by his father-in-law. However, fortunately, this is the 16th century, and even if it is despised, no one will blame Marin. Because, Marin is not the only one who does this. However, it is rare for sisters like Marin to take them together. Because, the wives of ordinary princes are princesses of equal status. Can you marry a princess and let another princess be your lover? Obviously impossible. Only Marin, while the father-in-law was unlucky, ruined both of his daughters. When the father-in-law turned over, it had become an established fact, and the father-in-law couldn't say anything. Because, according to religious rules, the father-in-law should not have children. Not only Marin, but also Angela lost his temper when he heard Felice's words. Hearing that Felice was pregnant, thinking of what Marin said last night, Angela's face suddenly fell. Is this because she despises her mother for not being able to have children? So, Angela was so angry that she didn't even eat the half-eaten breakfast, kicked Marin fiercely, glared at Felice, and went back to her room in a rage. Marin rubbed his kicked calf and grimaced in pain. But he couldn't do it, after all, he was in the wrong. Felice, on the other hand, had a thick skin like a city wall and didn't care about her sister's anger at all. Because she was very familiar with her sister Angela. This is a soft-hearted person. Although she glared at herself and would inevitably scold herself a few words in the future, Angela would never do anything. After all, she was her own sister, and when Marin was busy, she was the one who kept her company. The most important thing is that Felice also knew that even if she had more children, she would not have the right of inheritance and could not threaten the status of Angela and Caesar. This was the main reason why Angela could finally tolerate her. After all, it is normal for European monarchs to find lovers in this era. Instead of letting Marin go out and have fun, it is better for the two sisters to tie Marin to the palace. After Angela left, Felice became more presumptuous. She sat directly next to Marin, shaking Marin's arm, and said in a coquettish voice, "Brother-in-law, I have your child again, how do you arrange it?" Marin was a little dizzy, so he comforted, okay, give the man a count, and the woman a generous dowry, and find a powerful son-in-law. At this time, Caesar, who was also eating on the side, froze, "Count." Caesar had 10,000 grass mud horses whistling in his heart at this moment, and another 10,000 MMPs to say, illegitimate children to counts, "Dad, do you want to be so wasteful?" Marin also saw that Caesar's face was not right, so he comforted, "Son, don't be stingy. America is big enough, we can afford it." Hearing that it was America, Caesar was relieved. After all, if it was a native earldom, Caesar would be reluctant to give it up. But if it was the land in America, there would be no problem. Because Caesar had seen the map of America drawn by Marin and knew that America was indeed big enough. According to Marin, the land in America could not be fully developed, and it was indeed nothing to give a piece of land to his half-brother. However, he remembered the North American strategy mentioned by Marin, so he said, "Okay, but it can only be the land in South America, North America is all mine." Marin shrugged and said it didn't matter. Because the land in South America can't be used up. At present, only part of the Pampas in South America has been granted to William, the second son, and other places, such as Brazil and Uruguay in later generations, have not been owned yet. Even if Uruguay is granted to Felice, the unborn child, it's nothing, and the Uruguay region has an area of more than 170,000 square kilometers, which is larger than the North Sea country. Although there are no mineral resources, it is not bad to use it for farming and herding sheep. But Felice didn't understand and thought that South America was a very hot area. Marin quickly explained, although it is in the south, it is not hot there, but the climate is pleasant. If it were not too far from the mainland and inconvenient to control, I would not necessarily be willing to give it to your child. I plan to give your son a piece of land that is no smaller than the mainland of the North Sea. It's just that the land is good, the climate is warm, the land is fertile, but there is no population. At that time, if this kid wants to develop there, he has to find a way to find people to develop it. Felice thought about it and said, no problem, at most, I will let Robert help his brother get some Italian immigrants to develop there. Robert is the eldest son of Felice, and Marin plans to push him to the throne of the Pope in the future. It was because of Marin's promise that Felice was willing to be Marin's lover. After all, as the daughter of the current Pope, she is not worried about marrying even if she is an illegitimate daughter or has children. However, the temptation of becoming the Pope's mother is too tempting. So, Felice believed in Marin's evil and stayed in the North Sea kingdom with peace of mind. Besides, she was used to life in the North Sea country. There were abundant resources here, and with a kind and silly sister to accompany her, life was still very comfortable. When the child in her belly grew up, his brother Robert must have become a cardinal in Rome. At that time, it would be easy to help his brother get some Italian immigrants. In fact, there were many Italian immigrants in South America in later generations. For example, Messi, the king of coal balls, was of Italian descent. There were also Mascherano, Scaloni, Melito, and Mancini, a little from Brazil, who were all of Italian descent. In short, those with names containing C to Ni, Ta, Noa, and T are likely to be of Italian descent. However, Marin didn't like Italian funny people very much, and only liked German and British immigrants. But he really couldn't manage the South American region, so it wasn't bad to let Felice's son recruit some Italian immigrants to develop it. Therefore, without confirming whether Felice was pregnant with a boy, Marin directly gave her the title of Count of Uruguay. Anyway, after the development of the Uruguayan county, it will be under the jurisdiction of the North Sea country. Even if the citizens are Italian idiots, it is better than not developing it. Of course, all this is based on the premise that Felice gave birth to a boy. If it is a girl, the Uruguayan county will not fulfill its promise. Chapter 1609 Amazon Expedition and Zoo. Thinking of the Uruguayan county, Marin laughed a little. You know, although Uruguay doesn't look big on the map, it has more than 170,000 square kilometers, which is almost the same size as Guizhou province. Moreover, it is mostly plains, which is very suitable for agriculture and animal husbandry. Moreover, it is a world football power and the winner of the first World Cup. Such a famous country in later generations was actually given to his illegitimate son by himself. It's really funny. However, it's also nonsense to give the huge Argentine pampas to the second son. You know, such a large prairie with abundant water resources is coveted even by the great powers in later generations, but in this era, Marin got ahead, just so willful. Of course, the premise is that the Argentine region will not be taken away by the enemy. Therefore, Marin is now trying to get his shipbuilders to try to build a 1,000-ton large warship and the Pexan heavy artillery that hits wooden boats like a toy. Only with a strong fist can such a large and fertile land be preserved. Therefore, Marin felt that the European people should be frightened more, so that they dare not go to America. Therefore, Marin ordered an adventure team to go to the Amazon River basin to capture terrible animals such as the Amazon python, piranha, anaconda, crocodile and jaguar. Moreover, this time, the wretched Marin did not intend to send many of his own people to kill, but planned to send people directly from various European countries to kill. Sending people yourself and then publicizing the danger, others will not believe it after all. This time Marin is more ruthless. He plans to directly hire a large number of adventurers from Spain, Portugal, France and other places at a high price to go to the Amazon River basin to capture these terrible and dangerous animals. After these animals are captured, Marin plans to build huge glass greenhouses in Lisbon and the port of Cadiz in Spain to exhibit these terrible creatures and give Europeans the most intuitive impression. In addition, Marin estimated that this capture must be a bloody and terrible journey. By then, I don't know how many people can survive. However, Marin's purpose is to use bloody facts to tell European countries that America is really dangerous. In this way, other countries' desire to seize America can fade. To this end, Marin plans to recruit thousands of adventurers from Spain, Portugal and France, the three countries most likely to compete with him for America. Then, take a boat south through the Canary Islands and follow the ocean current to South America. However, in order to highlight the danger, this time, the ship will not dock at the well-developed Grenada Island, but choose another remote and terrible port as a stopover to deepen the adventurer's impression that America is desolate and dangerous. Grenada Island is different from other tropical areas. It is the only tropical island in the world without poisonous insects, mosquitoes and poisonous snakes. It is the most suitable island in the world to be the first tropical colony. Today, the development level of Grenada Island is quite high, and the island is full of farmland or spice trees. If seen by those adventurers, it is inevitable to be jealous. Therefore, Marin simply arranged it and asked the people on Grenada to directly send people to transport the supplies to Tobago Island, the southeasternmost Caribbean sea near the Atlantic Ocean, to build a temporary port as a temporary stop for adventurers. Then, after the adventurers replenished their food and fresh water here, they would go to the Amazon River Basin along the South American continent to experience the wildness and danger of the Amazon River Basin. It would be best if many of these thousands of adventurers died. Then, the living people would spread the terrible experience of the Amazon River Basin back to Spain, Portugal and France. Although the Spaniards once colonized the Americas. However, they only colonized Haiti Island and some small islands, and never went to the American continent. If the adventurers suffered too much loss this time, it would also scare Spain. Because they have not yet colonized the American continent. Of course, Marin is more worried about Portugal. Because Portugal's interests in India are now being robbed, and the psychology must be unbalanced. If they want to go to America to make trouble, Marin doesn't have much to do. In particular, if Portugal wants to colonize North America, Marin may still be able to strike. If they want to colonize South America, Marin will be out of reach. After all, Portugal is much closer to South America than the North Sea Kingdom. Before the giant ships and cannons were made, Marin wanted to scare the Portuguese the most. As for scaring the French, it was actually incidental. Because, theoretically speaking, France has great potential to become a maritime power, both in terms of population and geographical advantages. If France is determined to engage in great voyages and colonize America, then other countries will basically be fine. Therefore, this time Marin took the opportunity to capture ferocious animals in the Amazon River Basin to let Europeans feel the cruelty and horror of the American jungle. Although the Amazon forest does not represent America, other European countries don't know. Take the adventurers of their country who want money but not life to the Amazon jungle and let them feel the horror. Then spread it through their mouths, it can better achieve the purpose of scaring people from these three countries. As for who the North Sea Kingdom will send this time, Marin plans to send a few survivors who have been to the Amazon jungle to lead the team. However, most people use death row prisoners from the North Sea Kingdom. These people are sent to the Amazon jungle, and they don't feel bad even if they are lost. If they can come back alive, Marin is willing to pardon their death sentences. And for those survivors who are willing to go to the Amazon jungle again, Marin is willing to give them noble status. Of course, the fiefdom is in North America, not in the homeland. At this time, the book, Breaking Out of the Amazon, is selling well in major cities in various countries. Marin secretly arranged for the North Sea Chamber of Commerce to carry out large-scale publicity in major cities in various countries, and bribed gangsters to discuss the hot topics in the book in taverns, creating the illusion that this book is very popular. Then, let them despise those who have not heard of or read this book. In this way, many people will buy a copy to see because of the herd mentality or because they don't want to out. Moreover, Marin didn't think about making money when selling this book. Its selling price is almost the same as the cost of paper, only a little more expensive. Of course, it means that it is similar to the cost of paper in other countries. Because the cost of paper in the North Sea is much lower. In other words, this book is profitable for Marin. Taking advantage of this craze, Marin plans to spend a lot of money to publicly recruit adventurers in Spain, Portugal and France to form an Amazon expedition team to capture the terrible beasts described in the book and bring them back to Europe for exhibition. In this way, not only can the horror of the American continent and the authenticity of the content described in the book be proved. Moreover, Marin can gather these captured beasts and set up zoos in 3 countries and charge admission. Maybe, he can even make a profit. Chapter 1610, Closing the Mountain, Searching the Mountain, and Setting Fire to the Mountain. It is actually a good idea to build a zoo. Not to mention the 16th century, which was a time when entertainment activities were seriously lacking. Even in the 21st century, the zoo is still a place that attracts tourists. Although people in the 21st century can see tigers, lions and other beasts on TV and the internet, they are still happy to have the opportunity to see them with their own eyes. Children with strong curiosity will definitely like to go to the zoo. Of course, it seems that it is not enough to only exhibit terrible animals such as Amazon pythons, piranhas, anacondas, crocodiles and jaguars. Therefore, Marin will also send people to Africa to capture elephants, lions, giraffes, ostriches, zebras, camels, gorillas and other animals to enrich the variety of the zoo. It is conceivable that when these exotic animals appear on the European continent, what kind of sensation will it cause? In particular, people still have no entertainment activities in this era. Then, visiting the zoo has become a very good entertainment activity. At that time, I am afraid that the money for buying tickets will be too much. Marin is worried that what he thinks will be different from reality, so he specially asked the ministers and Caesar and other children. As a result, most ministers expressed their willingness to visit the zoo. After all, everyone is curious about those legendary exotic animals. As for the children, whether it is Caesar, Robert, Ma Yun, Ma Li and other children, without exception, they all expressed their great anticipation for this. Because children are much more curious than adults. It can be predicted that once the zoo is built, the children will definitely pester the adults to go to the zoo to play. As for the problem that tropical animals are not adapted to the climate in the temperate zone, Marin plans to build a glass greenhouse and light a stove in the greenhouse to keep warm when it is cold. In addition, iron railings are used in the lower part to prevent the beasts from escaping and hurting people. In fact, in addition to exhibiting those beasts, Marin also plans to catch a few cannibal Indians in the Amazon jungle. Then, bring them back to the zoo for exhibition. After all, what is said in the book is too unconvincing. Marin plans to deliberately arrange a few cannibal Indians in the Lisbon Zoo to perform cannibalism in front of everyone. The specific method is to starve a few cannibal Indians for 2 days. Then, throw an old and weak Indian who is not from the same tribe into the river, let them kill him, and eat him in public. Only when the Europeans see those Indians eating people with their own eyes, will they feel fear and terror. Of course, this kind of thing cannot be done too deliberately, and it must be pretended that someone from another tribe was accidentally sent in. Therefore, in this matter, there must be a temporary worker to take the blame and admit the mistake. In this way, the North Sea Kingdom will not be blamed. In particular, it cannot be blamed by the Church. Just as Marin was planning how to further scare the people of European countries so that he could monopolize the American continent, the encirclement and suppression of the Hungarian Peasant Uprising Army's North Route Army in the northern mountainous areas of Hungary in the south also entered the final stage. At the beginning, the army was somewhat helpless about the scattered remnants of the Peasant Uprising Army retreating into the mountains. But later, after Wagner, the commander of the Second Corps of the North Sea Kingdom, proposed to use bunkers to block the intersections of various mountain roads, the remnants of the Hungarian Peasant Uprising Army's North Route Army had a very difficult time. These bunkers are very hateful, because they are built high and have a very good field of view, which is convenient for monitoring the situation on various mountain roads. Moreover, because of the presence of the beacon tower on the top of the bunker, it is very convenient for the officers and soldiers to support each other. As long as the wolf smoke is together, the nearby reinforcements will arrive quickly and jointly suppress the remnants of the northern army of the uprising army. Later, no remnants of the Hungarian Peasant Uprising Army dared to come out of the mountains to find supplies. Because it is difficult to go back safely after coming out. But the mountainous areas in northern Hungary are not highly developed at this time, and there are still many wild animal resources. If the hunting skills are good, it is difficult to starve to death. Therefore, some remnants of the uprising army simply stayed in the mountains and forests and lived on hunting. In this way, they will not starve to death. In particular, now that summer has entered, there are abundant animal and bird resources in the mountains and forests. As long as you have a bow and arrow in your hand, it is basically difficult to starve to death. At most, other daily necessities are very difficult to obtain. After Wagner knew this situation, he reversed the knowledge of guerrilla warfare he had learned from Marin before, and then, learned the tactics of the reactionaries to suppress the guerrillas closing the mountains, searching the mountains and burning the mountains. Among them, Wagner has already done the mountain closure. The bunker with a beacon tower is a magical tool used to seal the mountain, making it difficult for the remnants of the Peasant Uprising Army in the mountain to obtain food and daily necessities. But if you want to completely eliminate the enemy, you still have to search the mountain and burn the mountain. Wagner was not sure about this, so he sent a letter to Marin by pigeon to ask how to suppress the guerrillas in the mountain. Marin was planning the zoo, but after receiving Wagner's letter for advice, he also seriously helped to find a solution. In the end, Marin's suggestion was to recruit old hunters in the local mountains and enough hunting dogs as guides, and take the German mountain warriors of the Second Corps into the mountains to search the mountains and eliminate the remnants of the Hungarian peasant army. These local old hunters are absolutely clear about the terrain in the mountains. It shouldn't be a big problem for them to lead the way. Of course, some people will not lead the way sincerely and take you around in circles in the mountains. Or deliberately point to the wrong way to pit you. The famous Western Chu overlord Xiang Yu, after breaking out from Gaixia, wanted to cross the river to Jiangdong by the Wujiang River. As a result, he encountered an old farmer who deliberately pointed the wrong way, which delayed his escape and was eventually caught up by Han Xian's army. Therefore, Marin's opinion was to specifically select those old hunters with children and grandchildren, and tell them that if they lead the way well, they will be rewarded, and if they don't lead the way well, their children and grandchildren will die. The old hunters who have children and grandchildren to worry about will definitely not dare to mess around. Otherwise, the descendants will be implicated. And with the guidance of the local old hunters who dare not mess around, the army that suppresses the uprising can also be much more convenient. As for setting fire to the mountain, Marin is very resistant. After all, it is easy to cause a forest fire. However, considering that it is summer now, the forest is relatively humid. It seems to be more difficult to cause a forest fire. Therefore, Marin's opinion is to try to avoid burning those large tracts of forest that are connected in a row to prevent the fire from spreading out of control. But if you encounter a small area of jungle that is isolated, as long as it is proved that there are people hiding in the jungle, you can set fire to the mountain and force the remnants of the Hungarian peasant uprising army hidden in it out alive. In those days, Duke I of Jean did the unethical thing of setting fire to the mountain in order to force Giazichui, who was living in seclusion in the mountains. As a result, the fire was too fierce and Giazichui was burned to death. Of course, Duke I of Jean was looking for someone, and the purpose of the Hungarian official army was to eliminate the remaining enemies. The two purposes were completely different. Duke I of Jean was sad because Giazichui was burned to death, and if the remnants of the Hungarian peasant uprising army were burned to death, the official army would not be sad, but would be happy. Marin's suggestion for burning the mountain is to try to have as few separate jungles as possible, and not many continuous forests. If you really want to burn those large forests, you can send people to cut wood on the periphery, cut out a buffer zone first, and then burn the mountain. In this way, the spread of the fire can be avoided as much as possible. Under the pressure of Wagner's 3 reactionary, special methods of closing the mountain, searching the mountain and burning the mountain, the remnants of the peasant army's northern army hidden in the northern mountains of Hungary have become increasingly difficult to survive and are not far from extinction.